now I'm doing still the same thing. I just think it's been about 5 years since we installed the Hostshawise Garden, which is over in Chinatown on Gore Avenue. And to look at a garden like that transformed a space that was an empty lot, and it became, there was Ken Lum's house was there, and believe me, I heard endless stories how sad it was. We took the house out and replaced it with a forest. So yeah, I just think about that, how people hold on to nostalgia in weird ways. And meanwhile, you know, I was really happy that the birds and the bees and different critters were actually celebrating having a forest in between these buildings. And further to today, where the youth who I trained in that are now running that site, that gallery space, and they do the programming themselves. They bring in people, they do the work on the land. And that's, you know, we need to really think about the work we do. Is it going to serve the next generation? How will it serve the next generation? And will it phase itself out, or will it rebuild and transform into even better possibilities? So that's the work that I really groove on doing with young people, because, you know, they love to tease you. So you get there and you get teased about yourself. It's kind of fun, because then you feel like you're at home, right? And there's all those good feelings that come out. Like young people, it's because they say what's on their mind, and they have zero to lose, by the way, especially in this city. This city is like unforgiving to young people, unforgiving to the land, unforgiving to Indigenous people. So they're always my top priority, and they never let me down. They always are there. You know, they'll show up even if they can't do the work. They're there. By showing up, I tell them they do the work by showing up and being on the land. And it's, you know, it's just when you have had zero of these things in your life, and you've seen it in outside communities and alongside the communities you've lived in, you get an opportunity to give some empowerment to people that have never had it, and you let it flow. And that's how I work, is that I make sure that young people are empowered, that they know who they are. And if they don't, then they find a sense of it by being on the land, and they always find their ancestors in different ways. So yeah, so I love working with plants. I love working with the language, with our art forms, with our youth and children. And yeah, I don't know what else I can add. I think I want to keep it flowing though. We'll see.
Asian. Haicho sees. So there's a lot to consider. I think that generational approach. When I look around and there's young people who are really vulnerable in seeking culture and seeking belonging in communities. And it does take a really serious vulnerability within our communities to seek culture and belonging, because so much is protected. This is the outcome of having some taken away and banished. Young people are even afraid to ask for guidance because of how sensitive. We don't always know what's sensitive, what can we know, what can we ask, you know, and it takes being vulnerable, and looking around at these young people and recognizing, you know, maybe that young person was raised in a strong family. Maybe I was raised in a family that suffered from substance abuse more than they were culturally active. And that young person's going to know more than my elder. And so turning to our elders isn't always an option. Sometimes we're looking at our young people for these answers. It's a state. It's the state. And so forgiveness and understanding when we look to these young people, I'm really grateful that you took that forward thinking approach, and beautiful work with plants, our plant relatives. You know, every new root that goes back into the city feeds that chwili, feeds that spirit in the land. So thank you for your good work, hard work. last night I was at a ceremony. I'm just going to keep it rolling in a second here. And one of our elders who always says things kind of harshly says, if it doesn't sting, or he says, if I'm talking and it stings a little bit, then I know you're listening. And that's old school. That's old school right there. You know, not everybody's going to say something that's, you know, soft and tolerable or like easily digested. You know, some different people have different approaches. And when we really open our hearts and our minds and we listen, we just take what we need. And that's all we ask, is that you take what you need. I'm going to pass it on to Tasha. If you do a brief intro so we know who you are and talk a bit about your work, please.
Hasquael Tasha Faye Evans Quian Snat a Tlictanatsna Say Mamet, currently known as Port Moody, where I'm raising my 2 children. My lands and waters begin in what is currently known as Nanaimo. My great-great-grandmother, her name was Elizabeth Klahoya, and she married William Isbister, who was one of the first settlers into what became known as Nanaimo, and it was the first Hudson's Bay trading post that was built on extraction. The first disruption of how land became resource. And I am the 5th generation grandchild trying to find my way back to walking on this land in a good way. My grandfather and his brothers and his brothers were all loggers. And my dad, down to me, by then, they forgot where they came from. Nobody knew where we were from. And I used to visit an old growth forest, Coxsix. It's colonially known as the Walbrand Valley, just outside of Lake Cowichan. And the land spoke to me there so strongly. I'm an artist, and I decided there was a tree. There was this big, beautiful, old red cedar tree, and at the top of her, there was a woman standing with her hands raised to the sky. And behind her was this amazing old growth forest, and in front of her was a clear cut that we fought and lost. And I heard her tell me, you got to find out where you are, girl. So I did. I went to the archives and I found my great-great-grandmother. She was not my great-great-grandmother, because I didn't know that yet then. My great-grandmother was born on Cedar Road, and there's 2 Cedar Roads. There's one just outside of Nanaimo, and there's one on its way to the Walbrand Valley and the Couch. And I later found out it's the Cedar Road outside of Nanaimo, but for me, it was like she was calling me home. The land speaks to me. And so when we sit here in these chairs and our feet are on this ground, on the cement, underneath the cement, the land that the city is built upon is built on mother log after mother log after mother log. Just down the water, there was a longhouse that was there, and people came and sang and danced, and their prayers went into the wind since time immemorial. And it really is true, the land does speak to us. Sometimes you can, if you're listening, you can hear the songs, you can feel the songs in the wind, because they've been sung and they continue to be singing. They continue to be singing in these winds since time immemorial, regardless of whether there is a cement building and it's now called False Creek. The land is here, and the stories are in the land, telling us how to be, how to show up in this world. There's mountains, there's sisters telling us how to keep the peace. There's a big, huge rock telling us about how we got to be devoted to our family and be spiritually strong. And I was just listening to my brother, Ronnie Dean Harris, speak the other day, and he was saying how every fold in the mountain is telling a story. Every one of those folds is a creek, and every creek has a story that it's telling. And the people that walk on this land, that have been walking on this land since time immemorial, as grandchildren, as like me, I'm the 5th grandchild, we can hear those stories. We can hear those songs in the wind. And so I was thinking about my intention today and about, like, you know, the panel, and so glad that we started with the land, because I really want to invite you all to reframe how you look out on this land and these waters. Really consider that only 150 years of disruption. That's not too long. When you think about back east, that's 500 years. But over here, it's only 150. And when we walk, our ancestors are so, they rattle to the surface. And so when you look on this land, I just invite you to see it as old and as rich with story and song. And that the people here, the people that are original caregivers of these lands, they hold those stories in their hearts. And so when you build your cities and when you make your policies, when you're teaching your children, I invite you to consider always having an original caregiver of these lands with you at that table. Because it's time we need to remember ourselves to this, to the vibration that is here humming. There's a creek underneath this building. How many creeks are rolling and rumbling underneath your building? So yeah, that my intention was to share, even if just to offer a reframing of how you walk along the sidewalk. If when you leave this room and you leave today, how will you carry what you've heard today? How will you greet the songs in the wind? Oh,
Woo. Thank you, Tasha.
Really good.
You know, there's something about artists and poets, right? Like artists and poets feel so deeply, they just can't help it. And I know because I'm an artist, I formerly a poet, and my mom's an engineer. So my mom works at GHL Consulting downtown, and she's a fire safety engineer, super literal, super like facts, right? And I'm like all in my feels, you know, I'm always in my feels, but we can communicate. We can communicate and we can pull each other into our space and our frame of thought. And that's exciting, right? Shared values in shared space. And I worked in politics for a number of years. And a lot of times in politics, people are talking about the same thing in a different way. And then they go around in a circle and they say it again. And they're like, you're not listening to me. And then they say the same thing in a different way, but they're saying it differently than each other, but they're saying the same thing. And I think of, where do you tie together the people? We're all people. You can tie us together in our values, right? And that's a good place to start. So food is another great place, right? And I think about how I actually just shared a meal with Brandon's parents a couple of weeks ago.
I didn't even know
He
that.
wasn't there. Where were you, Brandon? So I was sharing a meal with Brandon's mother, and she must have saw something in my eyes that liked the trees in her backyard. Her backyard is like the Garden of Eden, or you know, and it's not manufactured Garden of Eden. It's like the
Beautiful.
creators there.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
So she walks me to the back door and she's like, you see all those trees? She's like, those trees, me and those trees, we have an understanding. We have an understanding. And I was like, cottonwoods. Anybody who knows poplar and cottonwood knows that, you know, winter comes and they just start throwing branches. And it's not appropriate for residential neighborhoods or commercial, you know, like it's not an appropriate tree. Get rid of it as fast as you can. But she has an agreement with those trees that they don't throw branches at her house.
They don't.
And they don't. Now, it's not as easy as being like, yo, you know, Quapesh. That's their name. But to develop a relationship, this is deep. This is really deep, right? These deep, meaningful relationships with the world around us, right? Through language. It's a beautiful thing. I'm going to pass the mic over to Brandon, talk about his practices and connections to land. See him.
And so I'm also a graduate of Emily Carr University of Art and Design. I'm a sculptor, carver, and painter. And so public art is a big part of my practice. And so I'm doing 2 residencies right now. So one is at an elementary school in a district in Maple Ridge in my territory. I'm carving a 12-foot house pole. And I'm also doing a residency at a high school in Langley as well. And we're constructing this massive, like a Coast Salish longhouse facade with artwork, and high school students are a big part of it. And so I think, you know, one of the, I mean, case in point, you know, my children are here. A big part of my practice is working with children, kindergarten to grade 12. And a big part of my day, I'm centering other people's children in my life. I travel great distances far from my children to go be with children of settler descent, and center them all day long while I'm away from my own kids. And so today I invite my children to be in my space. Just for 1 hour, I'm gonna center my children while I work. Thank you. Just be good with that. Thanks. Yes. And I'm not going to apologize. Thank you. I apologize to nobody about bringing my children here and having them speak loudly or come take the mic. Zero. This is their land. This is their home ancestrally, and they're welcome to speak on it anytime they want. And so thank you. Did he just talk back to me? Oh, did he? Yeah, is that what he said? Yeah, that's my boy. That's my boy. And so, you know, listening to Cease and Tasha speak, you know, I remember it was a few years back, there was another symposium organized by a university, and I was a speaker here. And I remember what I talked about, how we are on Salish land. And I acknowledge that I am also on Musqueam territory, that I'm also Tsleil-Waututh territory and Squamish territory as well. And that even though I have kinship here, I also acknowledge that I'm a guest. But one of the things that I pointed to the audience that day when I spoke here was, if you just look out this window here, if you look out this window, what from this vantage point informs you that you are on Salish land? Please tell me. What is it? What is screaming, this is Salish land? Yeah, what, the sky? But nothing else though, right? That's why we're here. We're here because that's a problem. And we need to do something about it, right? And so, this is why I think art is so important, however that manifests. And I think we are in this like in an interesting time in this country, because for decades, I know there have been other Indigenous artists who came before me who worked so hard ensuring that the Indigenous story was told here through their practice. And we didn't always get Salish art presented onto this land a lot of the time it was art that was transported from another territory, planted here because it looked good on the tourist brochures, but then the local Indigenous people were not seen anywhere. And I'd like to think that things have moved along somewhat since then, but it hasn't. But I think one of the things that, we have, like, working in the in the public education realm, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission policy was first introduced in 2015, I think there was a lot of people in the Indigenous education system who thought, yes, finally, things are going to move and we're going to move forward. And these people are going to listen to us. And it actually didn't really happen that way. It wasn't like that at all. There was a lot of resistance to it. There still is. And I would say that this Truth and Reconciliation policy and the calls to action that came from it have still been underrepresented policy-wise when it comes to how cities plan their spaces, how cityscapes look, how neighborhoods look. There's very little in my mind. There's not enough. There's just not enough visibility for what are the vision that we have, the vision that these cities have and these organizations have aren't aligning. And so I always just feel like I'm always neck deep in it. I'm talking to city planners, city councils, school trustees, PAC groups, architects, you name it. I talk to all of them, and it's just these kind of events and this type of this type of symposium is so needed here, badly needed. We need like 10 of them, like in every neighborhood. Anyways, thank you.
Hi, Cho. Brandon. Lots to take away there. And thank you for including your son in this important work. Sometimes they just lighten a place up, Sometimes the energy of a child is enough to lighten up a whole room. And we got to be grateful for that. So just while they're getting situated here, what Brandon said brings me to the term master narrative. And there's this seeming lack of a master narrative in Coast Salish society. But I'm looking at both sides of the debate. Is it lacking? Is it present? Because what appears to be like disjointedness or maybe people not agreeing on things is a lot like, going back to what I said at the beginning of the day, agreeing to the protocols of one's own house while you're a guest in their house. Also agreeing, that many communities, house to house to house, have different protocols from one another. And even my own family, different protocols, right? People say, oh, you come from the same family. Maybe we come from similar protocols, but if I'm going to my cousin's house, I'm going to sit in her house and I'm not going to impose my protocols on her in her house. And so language is a lot like that, right? Me and Christy Lee, we might be able to sit and talk in our different dialects to one another without speaking each other's dialect and still understand each other because they're similar, but they're also different. And so neighborhood to neighborhood, house to house, I don't think there's going to be blanket answers. And that's confusing at times. It's confusing when you're looking for answers because there's this seeming lack of a master narrative. What does that chouhouas mean on your shirt, Brandon? Well, it's going to mean something different to me. It's going to mean something different to him. And it's going to mean something different to the school that has it as a logo. And that's okay. That's okay. So we're going to finish off with some good words from our dear friend Christy Lee. Maybe a brief introduction so we can get to know you and your work a little bit as well. Hi, Joe.
Si amnesty aya antaskachlia telitin atla sanach tamas telitin atla homasquiamas tamas. Aitan swallowing quitsni quitsnala nasi amnesty aya heitzepka tan swalla qua iti heitzepka nasi amnesty aya. Sanatan thalamat quasanaman aft samkin si thanamamana e kamora I almuch e Sophia. That's an osmat and than mamana. Heitzepka ta mamana iti heitzepka. It's in Quelan Kaminam Kani, Hi Tanashvas Kanita Makan. Good day, my honored and respected friends. My name is Skachlia. My English name is Christy Lee Charles, and I come from this place where we're gathered today. This area where we are is connected to Sanok and other villages, all other villages. I live in the village of Skalech, which is over on Musqueam Indian Reservation. It's also known as DHRT4, an archaeological wet site. You can find 7,000-year-old basket fragments out at the Museum of Anthropology. It's also a place where Kaistam once lived. Just before I go on, a lot of the stuff that we're sharing with you, you know, it's our protocol to share, say who we are, where we're from, and the knowledge that we're sharing, it all belongs to our people and our families. So it's the intellectual property, you know, of our people. So we're just sharing it so you can take it into your hearts and minds, not to start running with it and putting it online and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so where I live, it is where Kaistam once lived, and she was the one that held our Sinu in our territory, and there was big long houses all over in this village where I live now, right at one of the creeks that comes up from the mouth of the river. And yeah, that's where Sinu was spoken of. Heads of families would gather there. And this big stone, Kaistam, was had many representations. Like many of us, we all wear different cedar hats, and she had different connections to different things. And it's funny, she was lost for some time, and then our late archaeologist Wayne Point found her down by the riverbank and brought her back up, and she now sits in our council chambers at Musqueam, so she still gets to hear all the laws, and she's pretty powerful. I just wanted to thank my families for being here. Carrie Lynn, I'm like, wow, Carrie Lynn's here. We're pretty fortunate, you know, like, yeah, she carries so much knowledge, and it's just an honor to see you here and see the work that you do. And each and every one of you, it's honor. You guys are lucky we have to have this many Coast Salish people sit and share and honor our families in the room as well, our Musqueam families in the room. It was so cool to see Uncle Nick. Uncle Nick open the floor and welcome everyone today. When we were talking, I was like, hey, we got to give him some space, like introduce who he is and where he's from, because he's not, like I was saying, we all wear many cedar hats. He's not just, you know, someone who does a welcome and then, you know, he's got to go. He's got so many different things and amazing things that we do. And it's just really happy to be here, because you're all here for a reason, right? You guys all have, you know, an eye and a voice and an eye, eyes, a vision. Sorry, I had to come here, like I'm a parent too, like we're all parents and grandparents and aunties and whatnot. And I was like about half an hour, 45 minutes late because I have 4 children and I was running them to school and to their other school. And then one didn't want to get up. So I was like, okay, I'll pick you up when I get back. And then you have to go. So, and then like just getting here, like, you know, there's construction workers fixing the park across the street and they were like swearing. And I'm like, do you have to swear? Like, come in our community and just like be mad at our land and like swear in our kids' park, like, and then like just the traffic. And then I was just like, oh, creator. I was like sitting there and I sometimes feel like Pocahontas or a Disney princess, because I'm like, oh, creator, come on. Like, then these 2 eagles fly by. I'm like, oh, thank you. It's a good day. They get here and I'm just like, oh, okay, it's time to relax and go talk about the land. I was like, but oh, I'm so frustrated. Then trying to pay for parking, and I'm like, oh, this app's not working. I'm like, oh, my card's not working. I'm like, shit, I got to download this thing. And I'm like coming in here, and everybody's like, oh, hi. And I'm like, okay, hey, I'm just still trying to freaking park here. And then I seen somebody's status the other day. She's from Musqueam, and she's saying like, how many more parking apps do you need to download? And I was like, geez, the city needs to make like, record this. This is my idea. The city needs to make an app for like the 3 host nations, like Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Like we're all recorded. We all have like, you know, status numbers. We can all just apply and like punch in some kind of code because you guys all have us registered. But I mean, that's stolen land. Like a lot of the parking lots across the land are privately owned. They're not, you know, the city's like, oh, we can't do anything. I'm like, yeah, you can. So anyways, I could share and share and share. And I just I love living here, and I'm just so thankful, yeah, that I get to share about who I am and where I'm from, and like kind of live in a way our ancestors did. Like I'm so lucky I don't have to go do a city 9-to-5 job, but I can, you know, come here and share my knowledge and make the change. And when you're talking about how the old people will get frustrated and they're really stern, I was on a meeting online yesterday, and I was just like hearing the same stuff again and again. And I'm like, oh, you guys don't know who your own council is? Like, what the heck? And then I got a little bit grumpy, and I was like, oh, but they have to hear that side sometimes, right? They have to hear the truth of like how frustrating it is as a person from this land to always, you know, keep re-educating and say moving past. Like, yeah, we do public art and we do these murals and these projects, but it's more than that, right? Like sitting at the table, you know, some of us are at another table together, and, you know, sitting there, the architects and the designers and the landscapers are like, oh yes, let's make a recognition wall at the entrance. Oh, let's make a recognition piece outside. And I'm like, you're still keeping us outside. You know, you invite us here, but you're keeping us outside. And it's more than, you know, we're not just artists. There's no word in our languages that translate to the word art. There's no word that says public art, right? It's our way of life. We wake up every single day. Yesterday I was writing a plan out for another project I'm working on. My partner's like, hey, what's that? Look in your head. And there's a ladybug like crawling along. I was like, oh, it's a good, nice. It's a ladybug. And I put it on my arm, and it crawled on my paper as I was writing. And I was like, this is how important it is, right? Every little piece is important. It's not just the salmon. It's not just the water. It's not just the trees. Every little being, you know, in our stories and our creation stories is connected to every tiny little being, even those annoying mosquitoes, right? You know, they are an important part of our whole cycle of life. And back to the tables I was talking about, you know, we're not just artists, we're professionals in our ways. Like we've been building longhouses since time immemorial, right? So we're professional architects from thousands of years ago. Reef netting evidence has came from Cessnom, 70th and Granville, that says, you know, Musqueam people have been doing reef netting for over, you know, 2,000 years, mass creations of beads there as well. Evidence is in the land, it's written everywhere. And yeah, I'm so thankful we get to share and live in this time, and it's not illegal and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm really old school too. I could sit here and talk around the fire all night, but we have to roll. So heights up, kind of see.
Heights up. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our speakers. Tasha has done a great job of keeping the kids busy. Thank you for that. And so all of you, you've been so generous today, sharing your stories and your words and your perspectives. I hope you find a way to fill yourselves up, and may the reciprocity be in your favor. Haitep ka. Haitep awis. Is there a handshake for them? Or are they part of the team? Oh, end of the day. Yeah. Hey, where's the floor manager? Yeah. So that's the thing. She's like, where's the floor manager? A lot of our gatherings, there's like a woman who tells everybody what to do. And when I'm the speaker at those gatherings, I'm like, where's the floor manager? She needs to tell me what to do. But we're growing, we're evolving. That was great. That was really great. I love to see the evidence of this work, but some of the evidence is invisible. It's like around, it's like virtual ripples in the digital and real world, the work that they're doing. So I'd like to turn it over to Erwin. Erwin's going to take us through some terminology, I believe. And then, just to give us a quick snapshot ahead, we're going to watch a quick video, and then it's lunchtime.
So we had the benefit of sponsorship from the city this year was that we were able to meet, the speakers were able to meet a couple of times in the last month to talk about what we wanted to share today. And part of that was also thinking about language. And if for those of you who have been at these symposiums in the past, we always share terminology because things like reconciliation, buzzword, reconciliation is dead, reconciliation is performative, reconciliation is authentic, reconciliation activating reconciliation. Reconciliation is a difficult word, so how we use reconciliation is also important. So unpacking these words, I think, is really critical. We cheekily include the word reconciliation in the title of the event. It's the Symposium on Reconciliation and Redress in the Arts, but really would frankly rather just call it Redress. But then people wouldn't come because they'd be like, what's that event about redress? So, reconciliation is really about dialogue. Redress, as Pam Palmater says, redress, the reconciliation without land is fluff. And so redress, if you think about reparations in the Black community in the States, redress for Chinese head tax, Japanese internment, Komakata Maru, these are all opportunities to challenge white supremacy in Vancouver. And so redress is a really critical function. And we're really not there yet, but this symposium has for 9 years argued for redress. It's also been part of my practice for 30 years. I identify as a Dutch settler. I don't identify as a Dutch Canadian. How can you be Dutch Canadian when you're on stolen land here, on unceded land? So I've always identified as a Dutch settler. I see another Dutch settler nodding her head over there. So again, redress, settlers, migrants, these are all important words that I think we need to normalize in our day-to-day vernacular. Structural change versus performative change. Again, the system wants to protect itself. The system wants to perpetuate itself. And we being settlers and migrants, we think about, and we're told by Canada that reconciliation about residential schools doesn't unpack the other 90% of the colonial system, but reconciliation is the end goal. And what that does, and also people also identify reconciliation as something that Trudeau did in 2015, 2016, but it's actually something that Phil Fontaine and Harper did in 2014. And so the structure and the intention of reconciliation is to do business as usual, is to get on with it. And the labor of reconciliation in Canada has all largely been done by Indigenous people, right? So settlers could step back and Indigenous people would do important healing work, but the labor was hoisted upon Indigenous peoples, right? And so that's why it's critical that we take responsibility as settlers and migrants for what this is. Colonialism is our system. It's not an Indigenous system, right? We created the Indian Act onto First Nations. So colonialism is our problem. We're the ones that benefit from it. We're the ones that have to do the work, not safely step back and I don't know what to do, or we're not ready yet, or do we have permission, or so Lee Miracle once told me, if you're not stepping in shit, you're not doing much, or something like that. But it's really important that we think about taking risks and making mistakes, and like New Westminster as a municipality, thinking critically about what their mistakes were. So we've got reconciliation, whether it's dead or whether it's alive. Now there's bureaucracies, reconciliation programs and systems, and Christy Lee and I were on that call yesterday, both really, really frustrated because we witnessed reconciliation becoming a new bureaucratic system. And then the departments look to the reconciliation office for guidance. It's like, no, we actually need to all do this work. All of us have to normalize these systems. All of us have to break the colonial system, whether it's in Vancouver or other municipalities. And so we think about, as people involved in this work, we also think about the fact that there's too much work to do. And when we keep putting the work on Coast Salish people, the few thousand Coast Salish people, and there's 3 million settlers on Coast Salish lands, and we think mathematically that somehow that's work that Coast Salish people have to do to end colonialism in Metro Vancouver, well, I mean, it's not going to happen. So our systems have to break, our systems have to change. Now that we have UNDRIP, we actually have a framework to do that work. And I want to, 2 speakers that were not here today, Matthew Norris, who you'll watch on video right now. Apologies that it's on video, but he's at the Indigenous Leadership Summit this week, so he's unable to be here right now. We recorded a video with him yesterday. James Harry, we almost recorded a video with him yesterday. He's in Tokyo. When he said, yeah, let's do this, let's do this. He came to all the pre-meetings and like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be in Tokyo while the event is happening. So we didn't get James, we almost did, but I do want to introduce this video with Matthew Norris. He's one of our team members, and an important thing that we work with Matthew on is the urban. And I just want to make a comment. It's kind of an awkward comment because this symposium is always about lifting up Coast Salish knowledge, right? So how can we resource and support the resurgence and the lifting up of Coast Salish knowledge on these lands? But we also recognize that there's 62,000 urban Indigenous people, and we have to do those 2 things at the same time. So it's not with disrespect to my Coast Salish relatives. It's with recognizing that we have to fight for justice for local First Nations, but we also have to fight for justice for the Indigenous visitors who also have rights in occupied Canada. And so UNDRIP enables that. It enables, for example, the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executives Council, MVAC, which advances policy for 62,000 urban Indigenous. Urban Indigenous people have rights in twofold. One, Mesquatus, the Mesquatus decision of 2003, which was a case that went to the federal court. And Mesquatus says that urban Indigenous peoples have communities, and those communities are rights holders. And so we can recognize urban Indigenous communities as right holders. And I'm not saying, like, at risk of offending my Métis friends, that, you know, Métis have a right to a reserve in the Lower Mainland. No, they don't, because Métis have never had settlements in the Lower Mainland. However, can we as policy workers acknowledge that urban Indigenous people have rights? They're different rights than Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh here in Vancouver, but they're nevertheless rights. And those rights may be different. They are different, but they are nevertheless rights. Because when you think about the 40% of the homeless population being Indigenous, when you think about the premature death rates, when you think about the low high school graduation rates of urban Indigenous, those are policy decisions that we enable. And the distinctions-based framework of the City of Vancouver, I know I'm speaking to a lot of City of Vancouver employees here, BC government and the federal government, the distinctions-based framework is failing urban Indigenous people. And so that's, again, we can walk and chew gum, we can do work for MST, we can do work for local First Nations as a priority, but we can also do work to stop the harm that the colonial system, the Indian Act, is doing to urban Indigenous. So that's just setting a framework around reconciling that. It doesn't need to be a contradiction, that we can prioritize First Nations rights. We can also not exclude solutions for urban Indigenous because our bureaucracies are so focused on reconciliation with local First Nations. I would say it's a show of our immaturity around our policies that we can only do work with local First Nations and then not have the imagination to also recognize rights holders being urban. Anyway, that's thoughts on urban. And let's watch the video with Matthew Norris, and then I'll come back.
We're here with Matthew Norris. Thanks for sharing some time with us, Matthew. It's always good to have you with us. And we often lean on you for your analysis of UNDRIP. You're at the forefront of thinking about how UNDRIP impacts policies. You're also advising First Nations players in British Columbia around how we can bring justice to the issues of these unceded lands and the history of colonialism in Canada, but also the history of colonialism in British Columbia and in the municipalities like Vancouver. UNDRIP, DRIPA, Vancouver and British Columbia are leading in the country around their activation. We think about it often as governments, but obviously communities have also a role to play. So we wanted to ask you some questions about that, but why don't we start with introducing yourself so that people can learn a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Matthew Norris. Tansi, Matthew Norris, Nisi Digasan, Lac La Ronge, Otsi, Nida. Hello, my name is Matthew Norris, a member of the Lac La Ronge First Nation in northern Saskatchewan. But since about 2008, I've lived on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I'm a policy analyst, a researcher, I guess quasi-academic, and I sit on the board of governors of two nonprofits in the city of Vancouver. And much of my work focuses on the kind of potentials inherent to the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So happy to talk more about it.
I know your role with as president of the Urban Native Youth Association. You're at the forefront of thinking also about urban Indigenous, and we are gentle when we advance and advocate for urban Indigenous issues because of course Vancouver and the Lower Mainland is also unceded lands, and there's incredibly important justice to be brought forward for First Nations here. So that's always at the forefront of our thinking about urban people, urban Indigenous people's rights, balanced with, of course, First Nations rights.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about the history of this gathering, the symposium that we've done every year, we're often lifting up Coast Salish rights, and we're thinking about the obligations of governments. But we also recognize that the nonprofit sector, the landowners, the churches, the trade unions, the community associations, the neighborhood groups, all have a role to play, certainly had a role to play in activating reconciliation. We've always argued for place-based redress, that there's always an opportunity to do redress in your neighborhood, to inventory, to take stock of your one's relationship as an individual, as a family member, as a community member, maybe as someone who runs an organization. So our obligations to do justice for local First Nations. UNDRIP, is that something that governments should deal with, or what is your assessment of the role for the nonprofit sector, for communities to embrace UNDRIP activation as well?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's definitely not exclusively in the role of government to tackle UNDRIP implementation. I think it necessarily extends beyond that. And I think, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada articulated it best. In the TRC final report, its first principle is that the UN Declaration is the framework for reconciliation at all levels and across all sectors of Canadian society. And so it's incumbent upon nonprofits, public organizations, businesses, communities, neighborhoods to kind of really understand and come to terms with what does UNDRIP mean in these specific contexts, and what each of these organizations can do to help further its implementation. I think it's also worth noting that, UNDRIP is the minimum standard for the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. And I think that gets lost as we talk about it as this kind of key, essential framework for the recognition of Indigenous people's rights and for kind of reconciling the historical context that Indigenous peoples find themselves in. So it's the minimum standards. It's something that we're not even meeting yet. We have a long ways to go. It's going to be certainly a long journey. And I think a lot of people have roles to play. And I say that because, government moves slowly. It moves very slowly. It's restricted to election cycles. And there's a lot of potential in, nonprofits and non-governmental organizations to do the work that puts pressure on government to continue with its commitments, but also just to act independently of government to achieve the goals of the UN Declaration without relying on these tortoise-paced institutions. So I'm happy to talk more about that.
Yeah, so I think obviously settler denial and denying that responsibility and pushing that labor of reconciliation onto First Nations as if colonialism was a First Nations problem rather than something that's created by a system of white supremacy that enacts that white supremacy through the Indian Act and other systems. So you're agreeing that there's a role for the nonprofit and the community sector to play, that it's impossible to do the journey without broader society, to thwart this notion that it's the state of Canada or the government of British Columbia to do, or it's First Nations work to do. But in fact, when we break that barrier and say we actually are going to show up as settlers, as migrants to participate in this work, we suddenly recognize that there's church property, there's assets, there's opportunities for redress. What are some ways that we might want to encourage or think or show the path or encourage the nonprofit and community sector to show up for UNDRIP?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. I think presenting that way though can often be a hard sell. It's often seen as, a laborious, activity and when you look past, it's a moral imperative that we need to do this work. If we're going to be good neighbors and good guests on these territories, then it is a moral imperative that we address the rights of Indigenous peoples, that we uphold the rights of Indigenous peoples, that we do our best to reconcile our existence on their lands. And I say that as an Indigenous person who is a guest on the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so I have that same responsibility to uphold the rights of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh in the work that I do on their lands and their territories. But I think more than that, more than it being a moral imperative, more than this idea of reconciling with the kind of disparities between power and influence within municipalities, within neighborhoods, within these political structures, there's a lot of benefit that an organization can get from doing this work as well. You build, and the UN Declaration, at its most fundamental, is just building relationships. It's about having, formalized, structural, reciprocal, and respectful relationships with Indigenous rights holders. And there's so much benefit that an organization can get out of that as well. If you open your governance structure, if you open up your ways of doing business, your senior leadership, your governance structure, you bring in mentorship opportunities, all this stuff, you're going to learn so much more that has been absent from your way of doing things. And that's going to make you a more effective organization. It's going to make you more efficiently respond to the societal issues that you're tackling, whatever they may be. And you're going to learn an exceptional amount of knowledge from these partners that would previously have been closed off to you. And so, two examples that I can point to immediately, the two organizations that I'm part of, I sit on the board of governors of the BC office for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and president of the Urban Native Youth Association. And in both organizations, we're actively looking at what we can do as organizations to support and uphold the UN Declaration and the rights of Indigenous peoples. And it's taken both of our organizations in a completely different route than we would have gone down previously, and opened up a world of opportunities about how to be good neighbors, how to uphold each other. It's built relationships that we've both mutually benefited from, and it's going to have so much potential going on to the future. I also think as we're looking at the implementation of the UN Declaration is where we're moving to. I think there's such a momentum building behind the need to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples and take concrete steps in that direction, that if you're an organization that isn't doing this work, you're going to get left behind, and that's going to have significant impacts on your organization as well. So there's so many reasons why to get involved in this and why to start actually hammering home what does it mean for our organization to start recognizing these principles and these standards and these rights, and changing how we do how we organize and we work together.
And so sometimes we see settler organizations applying for a reconciliation grant to do that work, and we really kind of see that as reinforcing structural problems. What are some risks around these changes being performative? And not necessarily say your case studies with the nonprofits that you have experience with, but maybe your analysis, your critical analysis around the need for structural change, not performative change, and what might be the difference between those two?
Yeah, it's a good question, and for me, it still comes back to relationships. I think if you are, or at least saying that you're doing this work, but you're doing it in a way where you don't have relationships with Indigenous rights holders, then I don't see how you can be doing it effectively. I mean, Indigenous people have been out of systems of power and influence for so long, and that includes nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, public society, that when it comes to, hey, we're going to implement UNDRIP, we're going to recognize rights for Indigenous peoples, there's not a lot of folks out there who know what that means, or know, like, operationally, what does that entail? And the only way you do it is by, there's no prescriptive handbook on how nonprofits can implement the UN Declaration. It's about engaging and building that relationship and talking to rights holders to say, what do you need from us? And I don't see how you can do that without building effective relationships. And there's going to be a transition period. I think we need to recognize that too, that the more, a lot of rights holding organizations are already at their utmost capacity in kind of filling requests and engagement and consultations and so forth. So there's definitely going to be a growth period. But the way that you do that and the way you understand where your gaps are as an organization is by inviting those conversations in. And so I've talked to numerous organizations about this. It starts at your governance level. You can open your governance model to include Indigenous voices. You can open up your senior staff positioning to include Indigenous voices. You can mentor youth at every level of your organization, Indigenous youth, so that they're participatory and they're learning your organizational culture, but then they're also bringing their own experiences and knowledge and expertise into the organization. And critical to that is being flexible. You have to be flexible enough of an organization to understand that your ways of doing business might not coalesce with the Indigenous perspectives that you're trying to bring into your organization. So being flexible enough to addressing how you do that work. And that's the kind of the work that we've done at Anya, it's work that we're doing at the CCPA right now, is fundamentally shifting how we work as an organization to ensure that these voices, feel comfortable or supportive, are able to, build that reciprocity that is so critical to this. I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. And there's different, obviously, there's different ways of doing this. I think you're talking about relationships with the foundation, that we can inventory organizations, look at our governance structures, look at our staffing structures, look at our budgets, look at the history of the land that we occupy, look at place-based solutions to your infrastructure, what your service delivery is, if you're running a theater or you're running a land conservancy. These are all opportunities to kind of do that more rigorous inventory. You flagged this, the importance that the quality of the relationships are an indicator of whether or not it's performative. Are there other things that you want to share in closing around UNDRIP? When you feel optimistic that UNDRIP can be something different than reconciliation, because many people would say reconciliation is dead. There's an open debate about that, and that the resistance to structural change is being exposed. What are some risks and opportunities you feel like if we all get on board and we all start doing this more rigorously in our organizations, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, what do you think the horizon will look like?
Yeah, so I think I conceive of reconciliation differently as a lot of folks, and especially its relationship to the UN Declaration. So I think a lot of folks see reconciliation as this end goal, a point in time where historical and contemporary grievances are settled, where our national divisions are healed, and where gaps in our economic, in our socioeconomic conditions are leveled. And I feel like it's been largely, I don't think exclusively, but maybe largely performative, is that we haven't had this structure or a framework to ensure that those goals are achieved. I think UNDRIP is kind of new and exciting because it is that framework. It's the minimum standards, it's the principles, it's an articulation of applying it doesn't introduce new rights. It's applying universal human rights to the particular historical context of Indigenous peoples. So that's where my kind of optimism comes from, is this is the framework to get us there. And the reason why I think I see reconciliation as different is as I don't see it as an endpoint. I don't see it as a checkbox where we've achieved reconciliation. In my mind, it still comes back to these relationships. I'm a bit of a skipping record on this, because I think it's an ongoing process where different communities, different rights holding organizations, different representative organizations, we build a structure where they can come together and discuss issues that impact their rights and come to an agreed upon solution. I think it's an ongoing process. Reconciliation is always going to be a work. I don't see it as this checkbox. We're going to finish it and then we're going to move on. We need to build the structures in place that allow us to come together to discuss issues that impact our communities simultaneously and come to agreeable solutions. We don't have that framework in place now. I don't think at many levels of kind of governance and public society, we don't have that structures in place. And so that's the role where I see, nonprofits coming in. We have a commitment by government. We're seeing, there's different opinions on where we're at different stages, but we have municipalities moving on it, like the city of Vancouver. Under the previous administration, we have the province of BC, we have the Canadian government that are starting to move on what implementation looks like. It's not going to be overnight. It's going to be a long process. There's going to be a transitional period where Indigenous rights holders have to build their own internal capacities to respond to these needs. And that's also an opportunity where I see non-governmental, nonprofit, public society organizations getting involved. So what can these organizations do? I think there's a number of touch points that I would recommend. One is, if your organization touches on issues that impact Indigenous rights, then there you go. And the UN Declaration outlines a lot of those, land rights, cultural rights, education, housing. It identifies quite a few areas. And so if you're an organization that's already touching on these issues, then engage with Indigenous rights holders in your scope of work. Build those relationships, have those reciprocal conversations, ask where your organization can be of assistance. And also, look internally too, and like we already had talked about, addressing your own organizational, operating procedures to ensure that they work for your Indigenous partners. But two, if your organization doesn't, and I think you'd be a little bit hard pressed to find an organization that doesn't impact Indigenous rights. That's how holistic the UN Declaration is. But in this transition period that we're going to have as the UN Declaration starts to come online, there are going to be areas where rights holding organizations need support. And those are gaps that organizations can previously fill, that previously didn't have those relationships, can build those relationships to fill that need. So that's going to be a huge, probably years and years and years in the making, because it is going to be a gradual process. And there's so many areas. You talk about research, you talk about legal, we talk about the data is huge as well. Indigenous people don't show up in a lot of data. So if you're a research organization, this is what we did with the CCPAs. We realized a lot of our outputs didn't adequately address, Indigenous folks and different Indigenous experiences. And so looking internally to address how we do business to make sure that our organization is addressing that gap, that we're supporting the Indigenous communities just as much as we are other communities in our work. Those are a few examples, but and it's not a one size fit all. That's part of the thing too. Is you're going to have to adapt to the needs of the rights holders, and that can only be done once you start having that conversation.
Matthew Norris, thank you so much for sharing the time and sharing your UNDRIP analysis with us.
Thank you so much.
Likewise. Likewise, thank you all those of you who are listening. I've had some interesting conversations throughout the lunch period. I just want to thank everybody for their honesty. I think that's really important. If we don't talk about what's difficult and we don't start talking about solutions, we're just going to be stuck talking about what's difficult. And that's hard. We just need to pick what's difficult. They're both difficult. We just need to pick one. Like, you know, the work that we do, the discipline that we do, you have the discipline to achieve, or you just sit and wait, and both are going to be difficult in different ways. Honesty is really important. Vulnerability is really important. And I just want to thank the individuals for the encouragement and the vulnerability that I witnessed at lunch, and thanking who provided the food. Some nice drinks and sandwiches and whatnot, options out there. Much appreciated. We're going to move into our afternoon session, and we have a fresh face and a couple of familiar faces here for our decolonizing panel. Ooh, decolonizing. Oh man, decolonizing public art specifically, right? I spent some time with some members of the Indigenous governance program out of UVic, who insisted I decolonize through reading books. And, you know, books are great. I love books. But action, right? And what do we do, right? What are the little things that we do? And I just want to acknowledge those little things that we do. You know, allyship, participation, active listening, listening with your heart and your mind is decolonizing, because thinking with just our brains, it causes problems. So we're going to hear from these individuals over the next half hour or so, and on the topic of decolonizing art in the city. Corey, if you could introduce yourself briefly and speak to our topic today, that'd be much appreciated.
Thank you. My name is Corey Douglas. I'm a Squamish Nation member with Haida and Tsimshian ancestry. This is a really interesting topic. I started my journey as a cultural consultant through the public arts. I've since moved on to cultural consulting in the architectural and building industry. And you know, it's been a really interesting proposition as far as a discussion. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with this. You know, it has been a tough topic again to engage with. You know, it's not without hesitation, fear, hesitancy, and you know, I think just even opening up and admitting that this is an area that needs to be discussed. Public art has somehow accepted any form of our cultural identity as public art. You know, that's a topic all on its own. You know, anything that is of cultural relevance to a community, to a family, again, is deemed as public art. My question is that appropriate? And I can kind of answer some of those questions just briefly here. The public art community, again, has adopted any form of our cultural relevance. And typically we have non-Indigenous professionals assigning a monetary value to public art. And now we have those same non-Indigenous people assigning a monetary value to our forms of cultural identity. And I use one particular person as an example. It's someone that has found a high level of success in the public art realm. It's Douglas Copeland. You know, we have in the public arts community, we have celebrated
him in many different ways. I've used him as a reference to better understand what my own monetary worth is when going through the public art, propositioning my own public art to be a part of a project. And the immediate response was, I'm too expensive. So, you know, now we're getting into the depths of decolonizing. You know, and the big thing is the big question I have as part of that decolonization is, what is the monetary worth of our identity? I'll pass the mic. Maybe that's not necessarily a question for us to answer here, but you know, these are kinds of the questions that I think that develop over the time of engagement.
You want to go? Go ahead.
All right. Well, everybody came back after lunch. That's a good sign. So again, my name is Brandon Gabriel from the Kwantlen Nation, and Corey, I think you touched on a really important topic, and I mean, if I can just talk like a little bit about what my journey was like. I remember leaving Emily Carr back in like 2006. And at that time, I don't recall there being a professional studies class that talked about contract law or anything like that. And people wonder why when artists leave art school, they go broke. It's, well, they actually don't have business classes in some of them. And that was the case certainly when I left there. But I also recall at that time, the city of Vancouver had not really developed, at least as far as I understood it, a public arts policy that was centered around Indigenous art production. I remember, you know, there was always the city, like the banner designs. There was always, what I found a lot, what there was a lot of, where there would be an entire building would be designed, the entire landscape around that building had this design. But I also remember there was like this postmodern concept of minimal, like a minimal aesthetic, where to be multicultural is to take away any semblance of any culture anywhere, and everything is reduced to these blank rectangles. Or if we were lucky, it would have a slope on it, and it kind of looked like a bit like a triangle. But then sometimes it would be subdivided and subdivided and subdivided to a bunch of rectangles. Oh, wait a minute. Hey, look, right there. Yeah. Look at, I mean, we are surrounded by rectangles. It sucks. Okay. It's so annoying that that's the answer to being multicultural. To take away any semblance of any human activity in the space in its entirety, to the point where it's just robotic. It's just a robot infused space, devoid of any semblance of culture or history, let alone it being a space that is acknowledging that it's on stolen Indigenous land. Heaven forbid. And so I remember getting these call outs when I graduated, and they wanted one of the rectangles to be filled in with an Indigenous design. And it was just a little rectangle, like that little strip there in an entire space. And they wanted to give the artist $300 for it. And I thought, wow, this is 4 years of university. This is what I can expect now coming out of it in my hometown. Is that what we get? Yep. Okay, fast forward almost 20 years later, and it's still the same. They're still giving that the $300 honorarium to the artist in the spaces that are all still designed the same way. And it has changed significantly. There have been significant changes. There have been consistent efforts to bring in a different model that allows for more creativity for Indigenous artists to bring in their stories and tell the story in the space. But predominantly what I see is the entire design is done. And we just get the little spocks at the very end of the project. And we've had absolutely no say in the design of it, no say in what that space is going to look like. But we do it at the very end. And when we talk about money, it's garbage. Like I looked to there's a project that I'm doing. I don't live here anymore. I live on Vancouver Island. There's a project that required 4 weeks of work, solid work for me to come into the city to do the work. So I priced out, okay, well, what's going to cost me to rent a place for a month? And well, I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to go, I won't look on the West End or anything. Let's just go look in East Vancouver, maybe. And it's like, for like a 2-bedroom, it's like $6,000 for 1 month. Meanwhile, the city council is giving me $300 for like one of my designs, and then they're going to make me wait 2 months to get paid for it. Yeah, it's a joke. And so like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, this is good. And
Yeah.
maybe we can invite the third
Yes.
guest to maybe talk a little bit about, I mean, I can talk all day about this topic. I wish we had more time together, but
Yeah, just hearing what you're saying, it's like everything relates back to like who we are and where we're from. And like I was saying at the beginning, there's no word for art in our languages, right? It's our way of life. And a lot of our artists, like I'm not a carver or a mural artist, like I'm just Christy Lee, living out my name as Skaklia on my traditional land, like doing a little bit of this, doing a little bit of that. I guess being one of those one of those little ladies. Actually, my great grandmother who carried the name before me, she was known to go in places and cause a ruckus, and you know, she'd go out on the floor when work was being done and she'd stop it right away, or she'd go behind the curtain that you know, people aren't supposed to go behind, and she'd say, hey, you can't do this and you can't do that. And that's, you know, that's our way of living out the name that I carry, right? So I do a lot of behind the scenes work. Like I've sat on a lot of juries for the city of Vancouver, for Canada Council, for First Peoples Cultural Council, and yeah, and just happened to work like really cool jobs growing up in my community, where I had to go around and document our public art or our pieces that are, you know, in BC Place or, you know, in CBC buildings, and you know, oh, who made these manhole covers, or who made this mural, or who made this carving, and yeah, like it's so beautiful to live in this time to really be able to create this change and like help people understand that it's all connected, right? Like we come from generations and generations of you know, we're not just hunters and gatherers, right? We are linguists, we're carvers, we're teachers, we're, you know, architects, landscape artists. You know, these are things that we've carried out since time immemorial. My partner is like 4th generation carver, and that's just what he knows how to do, right? He can go out there and carve a pole, and that's what he knows how to do. But it's crazy how to think that, you know, we need to put a huge dollar amount on, we're so valuable, right? Like these corporations and these agencies and these, you know, companies who come in and, you know, put us last on the list, like Brendan was saying, you know, it took them millions and millions of dollars to get there, and they still have millions and millions of dollars to spend. And, you know, if they flew in, you know, some famous artists from, you know, another part of the world, they would pay for their travel and accommodations, their per diems, and, you know, pay for whatever it is that they're asking for. But yet, you know, when sometimes they'll come to me and they're just like, oh, here's your welcome fee. I'm like, no, you got to give me like 5 times more of that, because, you know, this is my job and this is what I do too. I'm not just an attraction on the top of your event. It's integrating the things that we do into the work that we do. And
that's a
there's so much I
really,
want to say.
I know, right? I know, totally. And I sorry to interrupt. And
Okay.
I think you touched on a really interesting topic as well, is honoraria is no longer acceptable. You know,
Yeah.
there is a requirement prior to a project going out for public tender, for example. You know, why isn't there a line item associated with Indigenous engagement? You know, it's not just public art. And I think that's what we're trying to inspire you with, to think outside of this bubble that we're not just artists.
Yeah.
You know, we are in this time of truth and reconciliation right now. And let's explore what that looks like. Look around this city. Look around any town that you're in, any city you're in. There is no Indigenous acknowledgement in the planning of anything architecturally speaking. And you know, that is a prime opportunity for a much deeper engagement, strategy, and commitment to activating voice and participation to this process. And I think one of the big things for me was trying to understand and appreciate my value. Again, coming back to the monetary value, what is my worth in this industry? What is my hourly rate? Honoraria is no longer acceptable. What is a scalable value? And I think that's the big question.
I just want to thank you, Corey, for asking the question and following that path, the path in the conversation. I'm a working artist too. I have to value myself too. What's my brand? You know, my personality is my brand. My ancestral design that I have rights to is my brand, right? But this brings to mind one of the challenges that's listed on the back wall. You know, we're talking about decolonizing art in the city, and the focus went to money and value. And so when we're talking to one another, actively having, you know, we're doing a relationship building exercise, we don't get to pick and choose the struggles that are at the forefront of our relationship. And unfortunately, the struggle has continued to this day, and you have inherited the struggle. We have inherited a struggle. You have inherited a struggle. So we sit together and we acknowledge the difficulties in that struggle, and we start listening. First comes the difficulties, then comes a bit of acknowledgement of the struggle. We acknowledge that together. Boom, we take a step. Who's to say many generations of living in that struggle is going to be fixed or remediated in one generation, in 1 week? And we want that. I love that you want that. I love that you want to see results. I want to see results. But these are systemic issues. These are long, historical, entrenched paths. And they're kind of deep. They're like rutted trails. And if you've ever walked in a rutted trail, you're like, I got to get out of the rutted trail. It's really bumpy in there. And then you're kind of walking, straddling the rutted trail, looking at it like, man, that's a problem. So we're going to talk about the problems and the issues again and again until we acknowledge them and say, yes, let's move forward. What can we do about this? And it's hard just to get to that point. Sometimes it's hard just to get to that point. Brandon?
Yeah. There's another issue that comes to mind where like there's where organizations or governments form an Indigenous advisory or an Indigenous jury, like a selection committee. And what I'm seeing, and I've walked into rooms to audition my work to be put on display in a competition with other artists. and it's the same adjudicator sitting on like 10 different committees. And that person has been there for like 30 years. And I've never, like, for those competitions where I've actually had to face that person, I've never been selected for work. I've never gotten to work out of it. And so, and I've looked at my work and I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's just luck of the draw. Maybe it's not what they want. I understand that. I can have a sense of, that sort of fairness, and that there's other people in the room who with other stories to tell. That story might fit well with what they're trying to do. But when you come up against it, like by the 8th time for me this year, well, I'm starting to question whether that's a fair system. And I don't think we can have that. I mean, like, if I were to like look at my own my own community of Kwantlen, when there was a conflict or something that needed to be resolved or a matter that needed to be handled with care, our people would request the assistance of a member of another neighboring community to come in and mediate and be the person to stand in between to help adjudicate the process. But never did we ever hire the same person over and over and over and over again, because sooner or later those people form bonds with other people in the community, and then it's not neutral. It's actually they're part of this, like, and there are divisions. There are divisions that exist within the communities that have been there for a long time, and those divisions play out. And I mean, like, in addition to being an art person, I'm also an elected band council member in my nation, and the dividing line in between the community members is insane. Like, there are some conflicts that are so intense that one group of people cannot even sit in the same room with another without somebody coming in to mediate space. And it comes down to another person coming in from outside the group. And so, but it's never the same. It's never the same person adjudicating. It's always different. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
We still have 10 minutes.
Yeah,
And I mean, this is the kind of topic we could,
We were out of time.
yeah, no, this is the kind of, this is the kind of topic
So
we could keep
respectful of
hearing about.
colonial time. I'm like, oh, I think we need to cut it off. No.
So we're looking forward, right? We're looking forward.
Yeah.
And we're also not forgetting the history and the past and the present and all in all, right?
Mhm.
But there's a vision, right? And we're here, we're talking together. Christy Lee and Corey.
Sure.
For sure. Thanks. I just like, just taking in what everyone's saying and just like thinking about how each and every one of you, you all come from different representations, like of your own cultural background, but also of your place of work and, the seats that you get to fill and the voices that you get to use, to help create this change, like we've been encouraging through all this whole symposium. But it's also like, we're out here doing this because we like to do this, right? This is our path. This is what we chose, but there are, so many more. There's hundreds and thousands of other Indigenous people from our community. There's not thousands of us anymore. Thanks, smallpox. But they're out there just doing this work anyways. Like, it's winter time. A lot of our families here in Coast Salish territory are going to start traveling around and stacking our wood and doing our winter ceremonies, and we're out on the land and like we're gathering these things that are so important to our way of life, right? Like, it's duck hunting season, it's snow goose season. People are out there gathering and preparing for, cultural practices and for feasting and for gifting, and like these are our ways of life. And when we host dances or when we host gatherings within our communities, we have this huge thing that we follow where we make sure like, everyone's invited and, representatives from different families are there, our speakers are there, our floor managers, like what we were talking about before. And I'm like, I'm not going to go on and tell you like our formula of, how we take care of each other, but we have these ways and we're very strict and we flow these ways together and we always make sure everyone's paid, nobody leaves hungry, you know, nobody leaves cold. You know, if they need a place to stay, we'll put them up. And these are the things that we've been taught since time immemorial. And I really think it's important that we give space for Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh artists and local artists to, you know, put our markers back on our land, not just because, oh, that artist is so trendy right now, let's hire them and put their big piece on the wall. Like just recently, I had a conversation with, you know, a couple fellow artists who are friends of mine, who are married into, you know, our families as well. They just put up a mural just like up on Dunbar, like just in Musqueam territory. And so many people go by and they're like, what's that Northwest Coast thing doing there? Why is that image there? Like, this should be Musqueam, because that's how we feel sometimes. And I'm not speaking for everyone, but, you know, we do get offended because traditionally, like my good friend from Squamish, Marissa Nahaney, we just did a tour in Stanley Park last week. And we stopped at Totem Park, you know, so cool, see all these totems. But, you know, they're huge misrepresentations of this land, right? And in 2010, you know, Susan Point put up her entranceways and they reflect our Salish woodcutting styles, the colors we use, our ancestors, our traditional food, our ceremonies, you know, our weavings, you know, and it's public art, but all those three things carry like everything I just listed carries who we are, where we're from, our connection to this land. And she was saying, like, you know, sometimes when we would go put up a pole in somebody else's territory, we're claiming war or we're claiming land, and, you know, and that's kind of what it is to me sometimes. I'm like, what the heck? What's this big Haida thing? I love Haidas. My partner's Haida, by the way. It's all good now. But I'm like, what's this big Haida? What's this big Haida pole doing right here? Like for me, honestly, when the Truth and Reconciliation poll went out up in UBC, I was like, what the fuck is happening here? Excuse my language. But like for years and years and years, you know, we've been under this understanding, like, you know, your guys are over here, we're over here, we protect our land, you protect your land, we have our ways, you have our ways. And then like thousands of Haidas came and danced and, you know, brought their blankets and put their down. And I'm like, shit, this is like, in a way, a victory, because colonization opened up the floor and said, hey, this is what we do when it's not what we do. And we had conversations in our community, and, you know, and we always do. We always go back to our community and say, what the heck are they doing out there? And we come back out here and we politely say, hey, you guys can't do that. Right. So this is just my one perspective as a Salish woman from Musqueam, from Squamish, from Tsleil-Waututh, from these lands, like living on these lands, and like also just to create the stuff I want to create. Like if I want to weave a blanket or if I want to weave some cedar, you know, like everything's developed, you know, I'm like, there's other communities like Squamish Nation, you know, Squamish, they live up on the mountainside. They have so much, you know, land they can go and harvest berries and harvest nettles. And, you know, there's elk and deer and all these kinds of beautiful things. Same with where Carrie Lynn's from. And I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with Kwantlen. I haven't been out that side for a while. I'm kind of stuck here. But you guys have so much access to, you know, the land. Whereas me, I get to go out right here and this is my traditional waterway, right? Like, you know, it's full of boats and pollution and people watching me from the high rises and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, and we have agreements where we're supposed to go over to Kwantlen and harvest and go over to, you know, somewhere else and harvest. But I'm like, heck with that. I'm going to Stanley Park and I'm going to strip some cedar and I'm going to pick some medicine, and you guys aren't going to tell me what to do. And if I go to like Jericho Beach to harvest, you know, berries or whatever, I'll have people reaching across me like, oh, that's a nice salmon berry. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm here with my daughters. You know, this is our inherent right to the land. Can you please disrupt? Can you please stop disrupting, you know, this generational teaching that I'm trying to pass on, because we are hanging out in a public park with tourists who just think it's great. So that's just, that's where my frustrations come from. But it's like, I'm just so thankful that, you know, if we don't have the land and the language and the teachings, like even just looking at Carrie Lynn, I was talking to her over lunch, and, you know, her carving that she has on her sorry to point you out, but just the practices that she practices, right? Like it's not just us always painting on a wall or a building, we go out on the land and we're curious, like, how do we process this mountain goat wool, or, what kind of wood, like she was saying, how do we make pieces that last forever like our ancestors did, right? We call this these pieces of evidence or belongings, what's it called? Artifacts, right? That we unearthed from all these different lands across our territories, and they still last. Like you can still pick up an adze or a stone tool and, chop some wood or cut a salmon. Whereas if you go to the dollar store and buy a knife, it falls apart in like a couple of days, right? So we're always going to do this. We're always going to continue to do this. And just like everyone else, you'll come from different lineages and you practice your family teachings and then you go to work and, we do the same things. We're out here living our cultural lives, but yeah, I don't know. I could go on. I'm done for now. Thank you.
Can I just add just a couple of things? The fragmented, like it's a hard reality. And I think one of the most integral, poignant points I like to make when I'm working, more specifically in the greater Vancouver region, this is co-Salish territory. It may not be just specific to one particular nation. It may be shared. And now we're talking about fragmented relationships. Now we're having to compete with one another for our own traditional responsibilities to the land. This is a colonial construct. And, now getting into the public art realm, now we have to compete with one another. How is that a part of the traditional practices? Now, I didn't grow up with, a deeply rooted cultural identity. I found my identity well into my 30s. I was very far removed from my community, my cultural identity. It was doubly reinforced with my grandmother attending the residential school system and then my father. And activating this voice, and we have three panelists here. For me, I'll speak specifically to me. Activating this voice has been a real struggle. Sitting up here, finding a high level of confidence in myself to talk about a topic that I was not familiar with. I've only been doing this for 4 years, and it's crazy how informative an Indigenous voice can be in participation of a project where you're wanting to explore indigeneity. I think that's maybe one of the things I would love to challenge you with on a future project where you're wanting to bring indigeneity to your project and your process, is to activate a voice from a community. We have land acknowledgements out there, and even that's a hot topic. We don't know whose traditional territory your project may fall within, but someone from the community may be able to provide you with the appropriate guidance and support to activate the communities who you're meant to engage with. Thank you.
I got one last thing to add to that, what you're saying, and I think it's important too, is the business practice of where there's a budget, and allocate like a set limit for a budget for a project. And after the budget is set, then everybody sits in the room and says, oh, there's 3 nations, but we have this one budget. Let's split it up. Okay, so you're going to split the one budget into 3, but then it gets subdivided even further, because then each community is like, whoa, we get a budget? Well, we have 10 artists here. They all want to have their stuff on display in that place. And then the next community is like, well, we have like 20. It's like, well, why don't we just get them all to do it with those budgets? And then it gets pared down into these tiny little smaller pieces. But then what I've seen it, is now that there's all these different artists that are now all on board, the paying customer, the people that set out the project, well, we need to hire a consultant. And not out of this budget. We'll just set up another budget for this consultant. And the consulting budget is like 3 times whatever that budget was for the Indigenous people. I've seen it. I see it. And it's disgusting. And so there's that whole thing. And so like it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna have a budget for one artist and then you decide, well, you're gonna need 3, then you should times it by 3, not divide by 3, times it by 3. Why not? And so, you know, those things are commonplace. It's common practice. But then, you know, there's this other side to that too, where there'll be a budget. Let's say it's $3 million for a pole to be raised here. Let's just say hypothetically. Well, they're gonna drop $2.5 million on engineering and consulting, and give the leftover to the artist. But that artist isn't going to see that 500,000. They're only going to get 50,000 of it. And their artist team is going to be however many people. And then we're going to give them like 15% of that payout when they do the contract. And they get the rest 6 months later after the last brushstroke was put on it. And meanwhile, you know, the consulting firm, the staff are putting pools in their backyards. It's got to stop. It's got to stop.
Okay, we're running a little behind, so we'll hear from Christy Lee one more time.
Okay, I'll be quick. I just want to say that like, in our ways, it doesn't take us 4 weeks to flip around a poll and put it up. Like it takes us a long time. So like even the timeframes that you give us to, you know, fill out these grants and to get it done by, that's ridiculous. It takes time and love and energy and teams and all that stuff to gather and put it out. Also, the application process sometimes is way beyond some like a carver or a painter or whoever you're hiring. It's way beyond their reach. I've helped, you know, like Vancouver Foundation flip their application process to a 5-question thing as opposed to a 20-page application, and also doing a oral application where they send in a video, and also not questioning like if these people need the money or not. I mean, we're artists, this is what we do, of course we need the money, right? So there was one final thing I wanted to say. Yeah, it's okay to make a specific call out to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, right? We don't have to say like, oh, we have to respect all these. We do have to respect everyone, but like when we know whose land we're on and whose territory we're in, and you know, we can just say, hey, this money is for either Musqueam, Squamish, or Tsleil-Waututh artists to put it up there. And there was one final point I wanted to make. Oh, just come and ask us. You don't always have to put a call out and then keep extending it and extending it and extending it. Like I said, we know, you know, we have people when we do a gathering, we know who the speaker is. We're going to go hire because they're good at this, at speaking. And if they're not available, we go down the line to the next people. So, you know, we don't share everything, but if you come ask and share some tea with us or something, we'll let you know like, oh yeah, this guy's a carver and this one's a weaver, and you get paint from them and all that kind of stuff. So it's up to.
Beautiful. I'm just going to briefly speak. So much going on here. And as a working artist, I'm just going to briefly speak to my experience of working in Vancouver as someone who is not registered to a community in Vancouver. So in Squamish Snichum, Quis on Stop Milk, Elizabeth Atkins. My stop milk was Elizabeth Atkins, and she was from Squamish. She's Squamish, my great-grandmother. She was removed from her family when she married my grandfather because he didn't carry, he wasn't Tukten, he didn't carry a mask. And so these things happened. You had to marry through your ancestral rights or you got to boot. Thankfully, these things don't happen anymore. But I say, like, I have kinship ties to Squamish. And my uncle says I have kinship ties to Musqueam as well. But I do not apply I do not apply to applications that call out to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And on top of that, if I get a request, a direct request, which I love a direct request, I first ask myself, is this going to get me in hot water with people from Musqueam primarily? And, you know, some people have brand new policies, right? And their brand new policies say someone like myself, who doesn't have a membership in either of these communities, can't put art in the forefront of a building, but I can put it in the back or inside. Me as an artist, as a person, I feel small. I feel belittled. I feel discarded in a way. But it's important. This is the time we're in. We're in a time of resurgence of the voices and the visions of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh individuals. Resurgence is important. Do unto others. And so I step back. And I really got my launch pad here in Vancouver with the Vancouver Mural Festival, but they don't knock on my door anymore because they're knowing better and doing better. But if I do get a request for a mural in Vancouver, I know who the neighbors are. Who's the Hualmuk Mastiuch in that place? I pack up a gift, I make a call, I go and I visit somebody. And I say, I have something for you. And I have a request. Can I tell your story? Can I tell a story from here? Do you trust me with that? Do you trust me with your story? Fully prepared to hear no. And when I hear no, I back away and I pass those opportunities on to someone else. So it's just where we're at. It's just what we do. First and foremost, the voices of the ones who are still here. And if I don't live that way, you know, and it affects my pocket, if I don't live that way, I can't speak to it. I have no right speaking to it if I don't live it. So it's difficult, it's complicated, it's complex, but I love clear answers like this. We got to talk to our neighbors. And, you know, we're getting organized slowly but surely. You know, there's organizations within communities who have an open door. Squamish is a great example of that. Their cultural department is flourishing and they're busy and they're coming and going and they're speaking their language and sharing their songs and offering their culture. It's not perfect, but it's a start. It's a start of something. So I want to thank our three panelists here for their openness and their sharing.
All right, thanks, folks. So this title of Redress and Urban Planning, earlier today we talked about redress, that key issue. We didn't name pan-nativism, but that's another word on that list, those of terminologies. Pan-nativism is that kind of incipient colonial device that makes Indigenous people, you know, Indigenous Canadians, rather than Tsleil-Waututh or Musqueam, Squamish or Kwantlen. And so when we think about terminology, we're also sometimes stuck on these colonial terms. We just had a session on public art, and we really quickly immediately said, well, there's, Chris Lee was talking about, there's no word for, per se, art. I don't know if there's a word for urban planning in Hunkaminam or so nevertheless, we're going to have a session. This vessel is perhaps my mentor, Kamala, talks about Indigenous cities, and she's, I think you're the first Indigenous planner, and certainly in Vancouver. So it's great to have Kamala join us for this session. And so we're, hey. So we'll call it urban planning, but it's really not urban planning. So one thing that we argue for is redress, and let's call it redress civic infrastructure. So earlier I mentioned this project, the Vancouver Art Gallery. The economic reconciliation component that's missing currently from the VAG project is economic justice for Coast Salish artists. That's why a permanent art gallery inside the VAG is actually, I would argue, more important than the wrapping, the beautiful wrapping that's happening. admittedly, it's important in terms of the face of the land to have that wrapping, but over the long term, the revenues, the economic justice is not accruing to Coast Salish artists. That's the Vancouver Art Gallery, admittedly, 99% of the artists that I've ever shown there are not Coast Salish, right? So if you think about the Guerrilla Girls and that legacy of feminist critique of the white male institutions of art, we can also apply that with the Coast Salish lens and look at the fact that Coast Salish artists are not going to benefit from that building until we force the VAG to put a permanent gallery in there. But other infrastructure projects like community centers, housing projects, when there's millions of dollars on the table, I think Corey made that point of like, where is the presence? Where's the economic justice? Where's the careers being built from young people who don't just get given a broom in Blade Runner's program and say, here's your job in the construction industry, but those young people are said, you can be an architect, you can be an engineer, you can be a designer, you can be a planner. All these careers that have historically not been accessible to Coast Salish youth. So that's a bit of an introduction. We're debating on whether we want to think about how we do this transformation. Kamala uses the word transformation. There's perils with standardization. There's perils of bureaucratizing these systems. As I said earlier in the day, Christy Lee and I were on a call yesterday and like really, really frustrated that we're talking to one department and they're siloed in this municipal system and they refer to this other department. And we're like, but you can just take the responsibility. You don't need to refer it to the reconciliation office, because it's just like the referrals desk at the local nations. They're overwhelmed. And so to Corey's point, are we resourcing adequately that consultation process? And so if we can explore some of these questions around how do we transform the process, how to bring justice to city building, can we have a period of resurgence for Coast Salish people where we get away from this pan-nativism, we say to the urban Indigenous community and the visitors, including the white and non-white settlers, this is a time, a renaissance time for the next decade where we fully, all of us in the room, prioritize, if we're in Vancouver, MST priorities. If we're in Surrey, we prioritize Kwantlen and Semiahmoo, that we just show up for a decade. And it's really hard for people because they're sitting back going, well, I don't know what to do and it's not our call. And it's like, no, actually it can be your call to prioritize Coast Salish artists, planners, designers right now. So Kamala, do you want to share some opening thoughts?
Sure, I'll just because I haven't participated yet today, and so a lot of people probably don't know who I am, and you guys have had a chance. So sure, I could say a bit about myself. Yeah, and it's good to be in the room with all of you and to be in this beautiful place here. I took the ferry over from Gibson's, where my family and I moved like 10 years ago now. But I was born and raised in these lands of Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking people. My own ancestors don't come from these lands. So my dad is a first generation of Eastern European German immigrants. And my mom is Korean Métis, who come from different Métis settlements like Red River and St. Paul de Métis and other places that Lac La Biche, and places that I can now point to and talk about, but really haven't spent much time because I grew up here and my children were born here. And so we've literally been, nurtured and grown by these beautiful lands. So, in trying to learn my teachings, I'm the daughter of Loretta Todd, the filmmaker, who, was very active in the 80s and up to now. And I definitely have learned from her about my responsibilities to these lands, cultural teachings of gratitude and reciprocity, and sharing our skills and our gifts towards healing and towards transformation. And then all of my learning has come from friends and teachers from these lands like Christy and Cease and others who have welcomed our family so warmly and shared with us, what it means to live here. And so somehow I ended up working at the city of Vancouver, even though I never wanted to work for government, and ended up, I'll probably go into film like my mom, but basically at the exact same time, I started doing video and also started working in social planning, as it was called then. And I started calling myself the Aboriginal Social Planner, but it wasn't an official title. There was no Aboriginal specific role at the time, but I had the mandate to build relationships with the Aboriginal community at the time. And so I just wanted to quickly share that, over that period, that it was basically 2000 when I first started there, and up until today. So I didn't stay there the whole time. I went and raised my kids and did freelance work. But then I came back when the Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner position was created. And that was in a whole new era where there's like lots of Indigenous planner positions now, where there's the official territorial acknowledgement, and up until today of, the time of UNDRIP. And so I just want to say that in the time when I first started, there was absolutely no relationship whatsoever with the people of these lands. There was this, complete erasure. The Aboriginal community was what Erwin was saying, that pan-Indigenous idea, mostly people from other territories. And so when I would talk to people about, well, what about the local nations, the rights and title holders of this place, I would be told, well, but they're on reserve, they're treaty, that's a federal, why would a city work with the local First Nations who are over there? And so it was really a matter of addressing that erasure and that lack of acknowledgement, because of, this myth that this was an empty land. And so a lot of how we did that was through stories and through, we did a project called Storyscapes, which was about, oral history interviews, and the public art piece that Christy mentioned with Susan Point, because we were told how harmful it was that all of those carvings were there from other territories and nothing was there to show whose lands these are, especially given the violent history of what had happened on that particular site. And so it was just really like the recognition that arts and cultures, sharing stories, addressing that invisibility and that erasure is a really powerful way to help bring that transformation. And so basically it's been since the territorial acknowledgement and the dialogues project and the Olympics and all kinds of different things, and then the people from these lands continuously sharing stories, advocating, affirming their rights and presence here and continuity here. And so it's just incredible to witness those changes. But as we've heard, not much has changed. I think people are really taking on the hard work of making those changes, and the government and the city is slowly starting to respond and get it. But I have many examples of stories that I could share. People want to hear, including right here. I can just share this one where when I was at the city, they're looking at planning the Olympic Village, and they were like, oh, hey, we need to name some streets. What should we name them? And I was like, well, clearly you should reach out to the language speakers of these lands, and here's an opportunity to restore the language to the land. And then we ended up with Athletes Way and Walter Hardwick Way and so on. So all kinds of missed opportunities. But that recognition is slowly becoming part of how things are done, in terms of, some working on another project where there's a direct relationship with the nations. But you're right, so often it's just like a consultant. So where is the place for the people of these lands to be directly involved in the designing and shaping their lands? And that's right now where I think the work needs to happen, where it's like, sure, you might have somebody from the local nations or another nation advising on your project, but then at the end of the day, it's still the non-Indigenous designers who get to shape and plan and write their ideas onto the land. So that's where I feel personally the shift is needed. And I think UNDRIP presents that possibility, and the government to government relationship with the nations presents that possibility. So that's my quick little overview. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kamala. Yeah, and it's nice to see, I'm grateful that you're here today, because you have that longitudinal approach, and you can see how systems do change, how departments emerge, policies emerge.
Mm-hmm.
Corey and Christy Lee, do you have reflections on that journey when you hear Kamala's being at it, coming and going, and really emphasizing storytelling and lifting up local stories?
I do. And, thank you for, starting that framework. It hasn't been without, I don't know how to address this. Having been removed from my own identity for as long as I have, I chose post-secondary education as a commitment. It was something that my father had wanted to establish within our household. I didn't realize it then, but I realized it after. So I went on to study engineering and architecture, and had become employed in the industry of architecture. And I made a statement earlier. if you look around the city of Vancouver, I've been living in the city of Vancouver for close to 20 years. I'm a stranger in my own territory. The architectural and planning industry they have been integral in our erasure of our own identity in our own territory. And I'm only speaking to the city of Vancouver. This is every Indigenous community on Turtle Island. So I chose to step away from the architectural industry and develop a process to get involved in the industry as a cultural advisor to bring a stronger identity in the architectural and planning process, challenging industry leaders, architects, landscape architects, engineers, and even calling back to municipalities. Municipalities are typically going to be responsible for approving a project without any form of Indigenous engagement. But as soon as I'm involved in these projects, I start to activate an Indigenous voice in that process. And I've had the fortunate experience of working with I don't know if Ginger Gosnell's name has been mentioned, but I'm partnered up with her on a number of different project initiatives. And we've actually been able to develop new policies within the city of Vancouver. I don't know if you've read the Broadway plan, but we integrated a cultural ribbon to be a line item along Great Northern Way. So I see a bright future as far as how far we can push this visual identity in project initiatives within the local municipality here within the city of Vancouver, but they're leading the charge. You know, our neighboring municipalities are watching what the city of Vancouver is doing. Federal and provincial government bodies are watching what the city of Vancouver is doing. There's an international eye on what we're doing here in the city of Vancouver. This is now a marketable opportunity for a number of industry leaders to come and participate in how the city of Vancouver is shaped around that dedicated effort to Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh's identity. We have a large number of architectural companies that are coming here to compete on projects where we are wanting to bring an identity. And I'm called upon daily to participate in this RFP process. It's there, it's ripe for the taking. And there are very few of us that are actually providing a high level of guidance and support in this industry. And that's what we're trying to develop. We want to develop, and this goes back to an earlier statement that I had made. How do you activate voices from the community where it's not just government to government? How do you get members from the community to participate in a project in an industry that has shaped their territory?
Mm-hmm. Boom, that was a good one. Christy Lee.
All right. So funny, I was like debating, I'm like, oh, I'm still sitting up here. Should I still sit up here? I'm like, shoot, it's my land. I'm gonna be up here. But I'm so thankful that I get to share again this space with Kamala and Corey, because yeah, we all bring different perspectives. We all, you know, like kind of do the same work, but do it in different ways. And like, I don't represent, I'm not a, you know, official Musqueam representative from the administration or from the chief and council. And I'm not, you know, I'm not official city rep, or, you know, I don't work for an organization or anything. I'm just me living out, you know, my right. And I was talking about this last night with my partner, and we're talking about our different roles, and like, not everyone's he was asking, oh, how come you guys don't have a smokehouse in your family? And I said, oh, I never thought of that. We never needed a smokehouse. Like, our family isn't a family of fishermen, and our family isn't a family of, you know, carvers or what have you. And I said, oh, I was like, oh, it's because we all carry different roles, right? And when I look back at the name I carry and the work that my ancestors have done, and I'm so thankful. Like, Kamala has gotten to work with some of my ancestors who are ancestors now. But I'm like, oh, it's just the work that we've always done. Like, I've always been you know, this Salish woman and this lineage passed down of like, you know, keeping stuff in order and, you know, making sure everything's set in the right way and, you know, making sure the language is taken care of. When you open up a lot of the language history, a lot of it comes from in Hunkaminam dialect in this land. It comes from my great grandparents, Andrew and Christine Charles, and you can, you know, look them up and look up all the other ancestors too, like from people from the Point family and the Guerin family and our language speakers, our ceremonial carriers. And, you know, that's just always been this way of how we set our laws, right? And I'm so thankful that Kamala has always, you know, reached out to me. I've been lucky enough to come and be a part of something. Always just brings me in somehow. If it's not art, it's language or performance or poetry or, you know, cultural consulting or something like that. But yeah, like like I said at the beginning, there's ways that we can take this transferable knowledge and, like, you know, a lot of us Indigenous people were trained in our ways, right? Like we are the experts. We, like Corey was saying, we're the architects and the archaeologists. Like we've been doing these roles since time immemorial, and we have things that we'll share with you. And there's a lot of things that we don't share with you, and we're not ready to share with you. I was saying, like back there when we were looking at the questions, I was speaking with Anna, she works for the Parks Board, and I'm just so thankful how passionate she is about, you know, being an ally and supporting and walking with us. And I was saying, I was like, you know what, we're lucky, like we just like to do this, right? This is our job. We're artists. We like to do these things. But then there's our people in our community who just do it. They're just living every day, their cultural lives, and they're like, oh, we don't care about, you know, what gathering you guys are having. It's freaking duck hunting season. We're going out and getting some ducks, or it's, you know, it's time to harvest this or that or whatever, right? So we have to give, you know, much love and respect to everyone, each one of our people in our communities. And yeah, I'm so thankful I've got to work on projects to help create change and to bring my voice in a community level, within my family too. Like we have family meetings to talk about, you know, things that we want to do within our family groupings, and then community level and here in this urban area, along with the city and the different municipalities. But also lately I've been working with different levels of governments and helping create change, specifically UNBCIC as a consultant, helping them guide processes. Back in June, they had an Indigenous laws gathering here, and they were like, oh, can you help us, you know, do the opening prayer and the lunch prayer and then the closing of the day? And I was like, oh, where's the Indigenous law from these lands? Like, oh, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you're bringing in, you know, chiefs and you know, federal and provincial municipal government representatives, and you're talking about Indigenous law, but where are the representatives from the people of these lands? We carry Sinu, we carry Snowias, we have Indigenous laws that we still follow to this day, and we're very, very strict on how we do it. So then I made them change the whole agenda and spent a lot of their money because we need to feed people. We need to make sure people are taken care of, you know, their parking. Like I said this morning, you guys need to reimburse me 15 something, by the way. So take care of their parking and feed them and have nice, comfortable chairs to sit on, right? If I were inviting you into my longhouse and you were my honored guest, I'd make sure you'd have a nice, cozy, warm place to sit. And that's why I'm sitting in this chair. But then, yeah, so there's ways that we can do that, right? And we can work together and we can do it respectfully without, you know, disrespecting the nations or disrespecting families' protocols. And that's what we do as Coast Salish people, right? We come from these different ways and I'm so thankful. Thank you, Haichka. I'm so thankful. I can't talk about it, but I come from a sacred society that was born out of Stanley Park, actually. And it's my birthright to practice that. And I can pass it on to my daughters, and my son, you know, can dance the dance. And if something's going wrong within our society, all the representatives from the people who belong to the society in Coast Salish territory, we come together and we sit and we say, hey, you know, this is what happened over here and that happened over there. How do we fix it, or how do we stop it, or how do we make it better? And that's what we can do, right? We can just sit down and talk and say, hey, you know, we can do these things together, and we always find a way in our Huelmoch way. We either stop it and say that's not going to be done here, or we find a way to make it happen together. And just last week, I had the honor again of working on a women's gathering. All week there was a gathering for specific claims, talking about, you know, all these different things that are happening across Indigenous country, and our rights, our inherent rights, and the things we're fighting for. And then at the very last day, it was a women in specific claims gathering, because during the development of the reservation systems and documenting of creating of these cities, our women's voices were excluded. And it's also, there's many stories in our history where, you know, the markings of these lands and the different territories, and, you know, they only talked to some of the men that were there. They didn't document the women when we were home taking care of the babies and you know, cleaning house and cooking food. And shoot, I barely get sleep. I gotta go home and cook a meal for 6 after this. But those are the things that we do. And so last week they said, hey, like, how do we invite women, and how do we bring the women together? And that's what we did. We invited all the women who are from the different nations, who are expert in what they do, experts in language, experts in we had Cease and her daughter Sanakola come and share a tea blending workshop. But that's the importance of you know, the medicine and the connection to the land and the connection to the inherent right and to the generational right that we're passing down, and putting it back into the space. And we had speakers from the 3 nations, women from the 3 nations come and speak. And we invited matriarchs from like different communities to come, and we all sat around and we're like, oh, now we're going to call this, like, we need our own organization, Union of BC Indigenous Matriarchs, right? And now we need all the funding, and all our voices are back, and now it's been recorded that, you know, women, you know, we have these rights and these powers. And when you look around, a lot of the house posts, some of them are women, because we have that connection of telling stories. And I can go on, but I'll just leave it at that.
I was just thinking, before we have our last session with the Salish speakers again, Kamala, perhaps we can hear from you one more time.
Yeah, I wanted to just follow off what Christy got me thinking about in general, thinking that probably a lot of people here are from non-Indigenous organizations or government. And I think, like, even though we're seeing a lot of change, I think there's sometimes this idea of like, oh, we just need to incorporate, we just need to include. So that's, you know, you hear a lot of times about this tokenistic, and it is often with this idea of like, okay, well, as long as we recognize and acknowledge and include, so we'll do like a sustainability project, and we'll make sure that we include the perspective of the local nations, which obviously is a given that should happen. But it needs to go beyond that and deeper than that, because it can obviously become an extractive thing, where it also can become a thing of like, oh yeah, we have their perspective, and meanwhile we'll continue with business as usual, and we'll continue with the system as it is and the power structures as they are. So in the case of something like sustainability, it's, you know, the reminder that we heard really strong from Christy just now around rights, and that it's not just, you know, let's make the city greener for everybody. Let's make the city greener, make sure we incorporate, you know, Indigenous teachings, but it's actually, you need to clean this place up for the rights holders of these lands, who have the right to be able to go and pick berries and access those places and ceremony and all of those things that were here before that should, you know, continue to exist. And so the language needs to shift, and it is shifting around rights and the enjoyment of rights and the practicing and exercising of rights, and how that can actually happen in an urban environment. It's not easy, but it has to be, in my experience, based on that fundamental recognition. Because I'll hear people be like, oh yeah, we need to incorporate more of Indigenous teachings into our work. And it's like, no, you actually need, yes, but you also need to go deeper. And so that also goes with the idea of like, you know, oh, well, we'll include a consultant and then we have enough. But actually it's that designing and it's the decision-making for the lands that restores the decision-making rights of the first people of the land. So how can you contribute towards upholding the first people's rights to make decisions for their lands, to have that self-determination over their lands? And so hopefully we're getting to that point gradually, but even just little things like, you know, I will quickly mention 2 projects, one being the new Parks Board project, the park naming, where I was approached to help facilitate a conversation with each of the nations, and it was definitely framed as, isn't this a great thing? The park board has said, hey, here's a new park, let's have the nations name it. But then in the first meeting, it was very clear, because the park had already been designed, just like you were saying, everything was already done, just like Brandon was saying, but hey, can the nations gift a name? And so the feelings were very, you know, there was a lot of hurt there and a lot of like, we need to let you see how you've approached this. You know, people, non-native people designed this place, decided what it should look like, you know, could tell the story, and now you want us to put a name on it. And so there was a lot of learning that happened there for park board staff and real respectful listening. And the shift that happened there was, at least now all programming that happens at Sakochenum or Sotsakwe Park is just from the nation.
I was just going to ask who can say the name though.
Yeah, because I edited the videos, I heard it all the time. It's so beautiful in my mind, hearing their voices. So yeah, you know, the public art is just from the local nations, the cultural programming, the plant knowledge, all of that is, you know, at least reflects the name. And then hopefully next time around, when the new park happens, that won't happen. So yeah, I think that's a good example to end with, and the shift.
And I'm going to ask Corey to hold on to his thoughts, because you're just going to stay there and we're going to bring up our other Salish speakers. But thank you, Kamala, for joining us on this session.
Yeah.
So do use the boards up in the back. And I also know there's some chat. Chelsea's gathering some observations from the chat online, and hello to our viewers online. We're going to send I think a survey to everybody who's come today and who's joined us online, because there'll be a way to capture a bit of opportunity for you to get more materials from us. Also for us to mail you the toolkit that we work on. And we'd love to probably get more questions than I see on the back, where you share with us, I really want this to be in the toolkit, or we've struggled with this, or here's a success story. So we'd love to have a bit more engagement with you in the future. And I also think, Cease, when we think about doing these on an annual basis, maybe we can also do these on a more frequent basis, maybe on a particular subject, whether it's a lunchtime brown bagger or an evening lecture, just something, because I think we're doing good work, and I'm grateful for all this incredible people that are agreeing to do the work today. And Carrie Lynn, thank you so much for helping us carry this challenging work. And thanks to all of the settlers, migrants, Indigenous people who are here today as well. Thanks for showing up and doing the work as well.
Hi, chap. Hi, chap to wetly almost. Some good listening today. I'll probably say it again. Maybe I teach too often teenagers, which they listen in their own way, and it's usually by not listening. So my side job for a long time, I was running an environmental consultancy in the Fraser Valley. And it was through doing not only the technical work, but the management of that environmental consultancy that I discovered that I had an ability to project manage. And when I left that job to do what I'm doing now, I took all my project management skills with me. And I often encounter angry mothers of artists, and they're like, my so-and-so doesn't get any of these opportunities, and it seems like I get a lot of opportunities. I'm super stoked for all the opportunities, but a big part of accepting an opportunity and successfully executing those jobs is business. And business and artistry are not synonymous. And so it's been through learning business and applying it to the art that I've been able to successfully operate an artistic practice. And I just want to thank the lady I was speaking to at lunch for asking, the question about the art life, right? I've got a business art life and I've got a personal art life. And a personal art life is that my business pays for my research. It pays for my communal participation. It pays me to learn my language. I don't want government dollars to learn my language. I want to make enough money to pay myself to learn my language so that I don't have to write grants and applications and budgets. I just want to pay myself to do what I need to do. And that's success to me. And that's decolonizing my business to me as well. So we're back here with these beautiful people. I just want to thank everybody for hanging in, talking, giving, speaking into the space. It's a lot of work. So again, I hope you find what fills you up inside and have those those good feelings inside. We're going to, I believe this is an opportunity to kind of circle back and fill the space with lingering thoughts, or is that right? We're just going to circle back. We've got 15 minutes, which isn't a great deal, 20 actually. It isn't a great deal of time. So if you've got something that you don't want to take with you and you want to leave it here with us to consider, if you don't want to take up any of this space at all, that's fine too.
Can I have all 20 minutes?
No.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Corey's going to offer a full day Zoom session for us, free of charge. And then a round of applause.
Yeah, Erwin. Yeah, if I can, do you mind if I start? Yeah. This is okay. Whose minutes can I buy here? This is probably the most challenging part of this process. Sharing the appropriate amount of information. I've probably bitten my tongue more times than once today in the short time that we've had to spend with you. This is probably the most challenging part of any level of engagement. Appreciating the time that we do have with you. I wish that we had more sessions going forward. I'd happily participate. I'm available. I'm an independent contractor. I shouldn't be doing an elevator pitch here, but I'm going to. I have a broad spectrum of projects that I'm on. They vary in scale. I love what I do. I'm very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. I do this 7 days a week. My days are 8, 10, 12, 14-hour days. But I love this. And what makes it so much easier is working with individuals like yourselves who are willing to have a conversation about a topic as heated or as complex as reconciliation, as complex as decolonization. I love this. So I just wanted to share those last few words with you. And I think Erwin has my contact information, so contact me anytime. Thank you.
Here we go. I feel like we've been on a completely amazing journey today of listening to people's thoughts and reflecting on experiences and, saying some of the hard stuff that really has to be said. I have to say, I'm so relieved to never have to be the only one like saying those on one hand, but I'm annoyed that we all still have to keep pointing out a lot of things that we've had to point out today. And I feel like over the years that Erwin and I have been bringing this kind of conversation out, it's, you know, it's relevant because there are still things not being addressed. So having different people come to the table is really important, to hear other people's voices and to have you all reflect on the things that are quite unfortunately normal to us. And I say that in that way because it's distressing to me how many of these young Salish artists still have to really fight for their rights to be seen and heard, and to even have to defend themselves within their own communities for getting work, because really on the broader spectrum, like we're still barely being seen or heard. And you know, we're still looking outside a window like this and not seeing our culture reflected right back. And so, you know, I was talking earlier about my daughter and how I chose to send her to the canoe club to become part of her community in a way that she needed to. And I think part of what I was trying to say that I didn't say, but I'm going to say now, is that I sent her on those canoe journeys to teach her a discipline. You know, so my friends were like, "You're not disciplining your child." I'm like, "Yes, I am. I don't have to. She's learning a discipline." And it's something like, as artists, we have disciplines. So I really always have deconstructed this colonial language. So I thought about that word when my daughter was very young, and like, you know, because people would be like, "Oh, how are you going to discipline your kid?" I'm like, I was like, I hate that people are asking me, like, how am I going to penalize my child for things that she may not have done yet? You know, like, nobody's perfect, but I thought about how I wanted to influence her and how I want to influence young people. And I thought about that word discipline, and I thought about how art is a discipline. And, you know, we might not have a word for art in our language, but we all have words for training and for learning. A lot of it is about learning off the land and learning from natural elements around us. And that's, for me, that's what I really want. You know, that's what I gave my child. I still give her. She gives me that back. Like, that's a reciprocal relationship that we talk on the same level. And I was always told that when I had a child: don't look down at your child. Don't treat your child like you own them. Like, always talk to your child the way you would talk to any adult. And so then thinking about discipline, I thought discipline is about respecting yourself and the process. You know, there's a lot more to it, but those are some basic elements that made me think about, you know, the work I do. And that is what I influence into younger generations is, you know, I make it fun for sure, and I make it interesting, and I want them to learn traditional things about the land, about the plants, about the root systems and everything. But I also want young people to feel accomplished, because what I didn't always feel as a young person, like, and that wasn't any of my family's fault. That was like society was really saying that Indigenous people didn't have what it takes to be disciplined. But I grew up watching artists all around me from different cultures, especially Indigenous cultures, and I could feel their relationship as a discipline, and that it was a respect. Like, when I've seen carvers carving, you know, they don't just take a tree and then create something, there's ceremony, and there's conversations, and then there's bringing other experts in that help them. And the story of that tree becomes a whole different tree. It becomes a story of many things. It could have been about the Great Flood. It could be about the current issues of the day. It doesn't really matter. But the thing that I feel that I've always just really wanted to have a part of, and not be the one in control, but in any project, I want to be part of that discipline, and I want to be part of that story of how it comes out and how we together make that journey of, for in some people's cases, it's a pole, but for me, it's usually the land, and how do I transform it and bring the story of the land out for the next generations. So, I think that those are some of the things that have been going through my mind today, listening to everybody and how they work and how they've had to journey through this this colonial space and remain as decolonial as possible. It's, we're asked as Indigenous people all the time to teach decolonialism to everybody. It's like, but we all have our own interpretation, and it, could come from the same story. But we're all forced to live in this colonial state, in this colonial place and way. And the rules never end. They just never end, An ironic thing is I have a what is considered a really important reconciliation handshake with the park board. And that is that I have a field house. So it's a studio. And, it's located in a place where my family was forced out like 100 or so years ago. And the first rule on there is, here's a residency, but you can't live in it. And that is pretty much the story of everything in the city. It's like, I get exhausted having to explain that to people, why I cannot live there, but as I watch the housing go up in the city, as I watch families being forced to move places they've never even heard of so they can feed their kids, So yeah, I think there's a long journey we have to go. So if the work that I do with young people is to help them to find their level of respect with the work they're learning, then that's a lot of work, but it's work that's really important to me. And it's just a tiny piece, a grain of sand in this big beach of decolonial talks we're having up here. So yeah, I had so much to extrapolate from this whole day, and I was like, where am I going to take this? I don't know, but I think important words have been said here today, and what really lifts me is the diversity of the voices. Like, I really love that Erwin and I just keep like getting out there and looking for people in our community that are going to come and share these important words, and that we can bring that to you with the work we're doing. It's at the end of the day, if we can accomplish that, we're getting somewhere. So I'm going to pass it along down the line, or you guys have your own? Yeah. Okay. It'd be awkward passing this thing around.
All right. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of tired of sitting up here. No, I'm just really thankful. Like, just when I was coming in the door, it's just being reminded of like, how can, as a Coast Salish person, woman, Lene, how can I keep asserting my rights and my inherent rights to do the work that I do? I just come from Musqueam, come from the Charles family. We just don't like people telling us what to do sometimes. It's in my blood, right? It's in my bloodline to just stand up and to be that voice. And I'm always very careful. Like, I started out as an MC, and when I was rapping in our language, I go sit with my papa and my dad and different people from our community, and they say, oh, you can't say it that way. I'm like, why not? Because our language doesn't have a way to say it. It has a way of describing it and involving it and living it and breathing it. And then that's just what I'm going to do. Like, I'm just always going to live, breathe, and do this work. I helped work on the MMIWG 2S Plus report with the city and Rachel Watney. And when we were sitting at these meetings, it's so funny how the city, like, doesn't know about stuff sometimes. I'm like, you guys have a meeting every 5 minutes. Like I know when somebody's going to the bathroom because, oh, I got a meeting in 10 minutes. Hold on, I'm going to this meeting, that meeting. So you guys have time. You just don't make the time to sit and listen. And I'm so thankful that everybody, sat here and listened today. Because when we delivered that report, there's a chain of command, and, only the managers are allowed to sit here, and, only these people are allowed to speak this way. And I'm like, no, you're erasing our voice. You got us ladies to come out here into the communities and do our work. And now we're supposed to deliver it to you, but you're having like these people who aren't even from these lands deliver it to you. So we said, no, we're going to end. I was like, this is our home. And I had other people from Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh in our group. And there was about 10 or 12 of us women who were entering the chambers to deliver this report. And they said, no, we're all going to walk in. So we all walked in together and we sang the Woman's Warrior song. And I wasn't even supposed to speak. And my boss wasn't supposed to speak. Her boss was the one who was supposed to speak. And we said, no. So they passed it over to me, and I was able to open the floor and, say that this is my inherent right to speak on this floor and to take this step, because this is our way and this is always going to be our way. And, you're not going to erase our voice anymore. And that's how we work. And I'm always going to work that way. And I don't mean to keep talking about the work I've done recently, but it's also just like these conversations help me open up and realize like the work that I have been doing. This past summer and the year before, I helped organize a Meets at Huiwell, come towards the fire festival out at the Chan Center. And when we were planning it, again, welcome, closing, a few speeches. I'm like, no, we need to have, the MC needs to be from the land. If we're out at the Chan Center where it's distinctly Musqueam territory, it's our old warrior village. I was like, we have to make it all Musqueam. And when I travel to other territories, I make sure I acknowledge my families and we hire people from those territories. But just to give an example, like this is how we worked. We hired, the host was from Musqueam. The artists that we invited to sell their merchandise were from Musqueam. The set design, you sat with Musqueam artists and weavers and graphic designers, and that was reflected in the design. Even the logo and the colors used for the whole festival was from a Musqueam artist based in Musqueam colors. And then also having the lineup, right? They flew people in from all across the country and down the States. But I was like, you need to place in Musqueam artists. I was like, we have singers and drummers and dancers and MCs and, different types of artists, storytellers. So they interwove it through the day. And those are ways that we can assert our inherent right to hold the space and to hold the teachings, and do it where it's not always involving, different levels of government, right? Because we have the ability to work and walk in all these worlds. And that's what I'm so thankful for, that, our ancestors gave us all these different gifts where we can have that power. And if not, we can come together and use each other's voices like we did today and assert our rights in those ways. And I'm just so thankful. I was blessed with 4 little ones, and 3 of them are girls. And my daughters are always like, if we're stuck in traffic, she'll be like, hey, get off our land. We're trying to get to ceremony. And I'm like, yes, baby. Yes. I was like, we got to be a little bit nicer. So it's just, I'm just so thankful to live in this time where, we are being a little bit told by the government that we can and can't do that. But you know what? I'm not going to jail. I'm not getting arrested. And my daughters and my son are very strong and powerful in the path they walk. So, hi, Tsepka.
Sorry. That was an accident.
We used to have figures and designs outside lining these shores, so that you would know what families were there, and who was caring for those lands and those waters at that time. And I heard a lot this word of erasure today. And I just want to remind you all, or, I mean, we here are a panel of pretty kick butt people. We're pretty strong and pretty strong in our spirits and can walk into these rooms and take our space, but not everyone can. Many of you have spaces and you hold your meetings, but your spaces aren't always welcoming. They don't always feel safe. And I think that that's just really important truth for you to carry. I don't have the answers for how to make that safe. That's for yourself. But I think the toolkit will be wonderful, but also knowing your own education, knowing, okay, who are the people in this lands right now? Who are singing the songs? What are the songs? Some of those questions up there about it. How do I know how to talk to Indigenous people? You really just need to carry the truth that has been a big disruption in our relationship to ourselves, to our 7 generations in front of us and behind us, and to most importantly, to our land. It's covered in cement and buildings and a whole slew of systems that we were never part of creating. And many of you are comfortable in those systems. So one thing that I can offer, because it felt really great, was I work with the city of Port Moody, and I have a huge project I'm doing out there, and I insisted that all of our meetings were outside. We had our meetings outside, and we would, when I'm talking about art, I would take them to the locations. So we had all of those people who wouldn't even normally, like, they work the parks board, they work for the land, and yet they didn't even know where I was talking about. So get outside, have your meetings outside. And also, I think you just need to carry the truth in your heart of the disruption. And I just raise my hands to all my sisters and brothers here. Like, you're all doing such great work, and I feel really honored to be on this panel with you. I love you all. We'll see you.
Thanks for those words. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and for all the people who chose to spend their time with us. I really appreciate that. And oftentimes I walk away from these events and I'm just rattled, like, because of whatever I've had to share. And like, I know there's like a certain level of vulnerability that comes with it, but I try not to be too vulnerable because I need to be a whole person when I leave the room. Like, you hear those kids screaming in the other room, I got to be whole for them so they stop screaming and settle down, and we have a good rest of the day. And they did pretty good today, which I'm really thankful for. It's also nice to share space with my peers and not compete with you to put food on my table for a change. It's nice to just sit here and enjoy time with you, and we can actually like join forces. And see, that's my cue. All right.
I think that's all we have for our panelists, and we will surely thank you. I think we have some people right now to thank you.
And you, Carrie Lynn, for all your good work.
Love you, Carrie Lynn. Rachel.
And for being gentle on me also, for helping me learn about Coast Salish protocols and bringing that into the room today. And I appreciate your teachings. And hopefully people could witness that as well and slowly bring in Coast Salish protocols into your work. I want to thank Krista Voth. Where's Krista? Come on up, Krista. Krista from the Parks Board for helping us. Krista helped sponsor the room, and Krista just shows up. Krista is a bureaucrat who just shows up takes risks on that. Thank you, Krista. Savannah, I want to thank Savannah Walling and the Vancouver Moving Theatre. We've been a program in their annual festival for several years. And Isabel is here. Thank you very much, Savannah and Terry. And if you want to come up, the family, the work family.
I have a feeling we would have had a really exciting day if you had the microphone. Beautiful. And thank you for the gift. Yeah, if I had a drum, I'd sing you a song. Excellent. Yeah, I don't have my drum. So we'll ask you if you can take your seats.
All right.
We're going to call back our witnesses as a final, as a way of wrapping it up today. Sandra, if you could come forward and share a few words with us, reflecting on the day, your thoughts. I think you can pick a mic, yeah.
So much to take in and embody going forward. Almost feels like a call word for everything. Patience, slowing down, to Christy Lee's constant reminder, sit and listen, and respect the inherent rights of the right holders. I love that your daughter takes that to a practical level when it comes to traffic. And then, yeah, the Kamala Todd, I think it really just was like a bell singing out. She said the work is cleaning this place up for Indigenous rights holders. I think that's a good summary, because every one of us in our individual lives and in your organizational lives, that just feels like practical, cleaning up, tidy, set the timers, make it happen. And Tasha in particular making mention of, well, calling out that non-Indigenous people in positions of authority and in our regular everyday lives are comfortable with the systems. And I think today's work is a call to normalize discomfort, welcome disruption, and be patient with the process of transformation.
Wow, thank you for that. Active listening, beautiful. Just keeping things rolling. We're going to call, I believe, is it Andrew? Oh, we're thanking them. They're coming. They're coming. If you'd like to stand, it's important to have a handshake. Awesome. Andrew, is he? Oh, here he is.
I'm tall, so I'm gonna hold it. It's gonna be awkward otherwise. Yes, my name is Andrew Lockhart. Thank you for asking me to be a witness. I'm an architect. I run a small practice in Vancouver called Atmospheric Perspective, although most of our work is actually not in Vancouver. So one of the things for me, I'm going to kind of speak a little bit from my phone, but also just from a perspective of an architect I'm witnessing today. So one of the things that I heard really clearly, I think, was that we all have influence within our own spheres to do things with local First Nations, and we all have a responsibility to activate those sort of influences, even if they're very small, depending on our sphere. So for me, I think what I learned really is, and a lot of the work that we do is actually on reserve, so it's pretty easy to work with First Nations because everybody on the project is First Nation. But I think in the case of projects where, we're here, what can we do to involve and work with both creatively and in an economically beneficial way, local First Nations? And then I think another thing that I heard, the way that things look have power. And I think as we create things that look like something, that power is given to it by the people who make it. So I think it's really important that we involve the right people in that process. So there's power in the outcome, but the process itself is also equally important. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Family's gonna thank you. I look out the window and I do see a couple of things. You know, the Four Fires canoe race annually is happening in Falls Creek, and the kids are thrilled to race their canoes in these super tight turns in Falls Creek, and to park their canoes down here. I know there's some safety issues, but really it's kind of exciting to be downtown Vancouver canoe racing. And if it were nighttime, on occasion you catch some of Deborah Sparrow's patterning happening on the outside of BC Place as well. So it just happens to be a moment when we were not seeing what we're looking for, but it's coming. It's there. It's happening. And that's exciting. I would like to call Jess Carson. Jess, if you could come forward, take the mic, please.
Thank you. I'm Jess Carson. I work for the Park Board, and I've witnessed a lot of witnessing, but I've never been called as a witness. So this is really, I'm not comfortable, but I will do my duty. Yeah, thank you so much. I really learned a lot, had a lot of reminders. I work on the reconciliation team in the Park Board. So, you know, I think about this stuff every day, but it's been so helpful to have these sort of like being taken out of my day-to-day thinking, and, you know, having those really solid reminders of, like as Tasha said, the stories, the laws of the land are in the landscape. We just don't really know where to look for them. And we don't, as settlers, we don't really get those teachings. And so it's on us to learn what the laws of the land are. And, you know, it's just, you know, some really tangible reminders of pay people properly, involve people from the beginning. You know, the city has not been good at that, and we're still not very good at that. And, you know, Kamala reminded us how far the city has come, but there is still so much more to do to dismantle the system that has very intentionally erased Indigenous presence and very intentionally written a specific, you know, white Eurocentric story onto the land. So I'm always inspired by Indigenous people, always learning, and I'm just so grateful to have been here today to learn all that you shared. So thank you.
Hi, Cho. Hi, Cho. And your little ones listening. I love that. Next, we'd like to Joshua Starr, please come forward and share a few words.
Hi, I didn't realize I'd be speaking to everybody, but here we are. I'm a facilitator around consent, and I think today's journey really highlights the relationship between how we relate to each other, how we relate to our environment, and the importance of consent in that process. And while we didn't use that language, I think that really emerged in the sharing of the speakers. So I'll just share a list of words that came up. Slowing down, noticing, time, patterns, protocols, relationships, process, reciprocity, systems, and structure. Thank you.
You know, and he's big on celebrating allyship. And I think there's going to be that sometimes. Sometimes people are going to celebrate your being a good ally. And other times it's like the most thankless thing ever, you know. And I have aunties. I have aunties who through their, you know, their series of traumas, by the time they get to me, it's hard to be a niece, but I love them and I stand up for them and I stand up with them. And I have to go home and I have to recover and I have to build myself up strong enough to stand next to those women because they're still rebuilding themselves following this, you know, being forcefully removed from their home or as a child. Like there's some real issues out there. And even in our communities, sometimes we struggle to make connections. And that's real, you know, that's just me being honest with you. It's not always easy to make connections, but we don't get discouraged. We know what we have to offer. We know where our heart and our intention is, and we turn around and we try to make another connection, right? Or we talk to somebody who has a connection. And as much as there isn't a prescription for it, I think this toolkit's going to bring some really great tools to the forefront. And a gentle reminder, if you haven't already put your address down, email address or mailing address, there is a sheet there where you can receive the toolkit in the future. So tangible documents are coming, you know, and some offers have been made in the space today, offers for assistance. And I think those are two great starts. You know, you coming here, the words that came out, things are moving. And that's what all we can do. And if we did that today, we did something. So, hi tep awith, my gratitude to you all, Yathu Kwasai Tetfalab.